Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. Today, we will be debating whether morals progress or not. I'm joined with Magnus, and hopefully, we can come to some sort of conclusion. So, if you're interested, please stay tuned.
Well, indeed, we're going to be having a Hegelian dialectic. The chat is saying no sound. Oh, God. This is going to be a mime debate. We're going to mime at each other's philosophical positions. Oh, apparently I have sound. Oh, that's good. I can just present my viewpoint, and you can bugger off.
Right,
So,
I imagine
guys,
you can hear us. Sorry, I imagine you can hear us here. Yeah.
hello, testing. Look, they can just lip read, all right?
Yeah, sorry guys, I am resolving this. Yeah, I know what is going wrong. So it is essentially that there is a missing. Alright, can I copy that over? I think, yeah. Okay, right. Can you hear us now? Sorry for that, guys. Bit of technical difficulties getting here. Yeah. Wait, we both sound like. Can you hear us okay?
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3.
You'll type what I'm saying. So, guys, if there's any problems, just let me know. So, yeah, we're going to be debating moral truth. So, Magnus is arguing that morality does not progress. Is that right?
Yes, yes, I will be arguing that moral truths are in fact stagnant. I will be arguing that it is semantically inaccurate and straight up wrong to describe something as moral progress. What you would really be describing is our relative understanding and sophistication of the moral truths that we are observing. That would be what you were describing as progressing.
So it's almost like I think what Magnus is arguing for is a case in which there already is truth within the world, that there is already a concrete conception of truth. However, our conception of it is what is lacking. So he's not saying that there isn't moral truth, or that moral truth doesn't progress in one sense. It's almost like you're saying that what I would characterize as reality. So what I would say is that the reality is separate from truth, and that there's a difference between our conceptualization of reality and within regards to morality, and that is what truth is. It's the concept of reality, the concepts in which we apply to the existence of a of an objective world. So how would you respond to that?
Well, I would respond by saying that I would define truth and reality as synonymous. I would ascribe to the
Hello? I don't know if
reality
he's...
and truth
Sorry,
are
Magnus, you
one
kind of
and
dropped
one.
out there.
Oh God.
So what? No, what did you say?
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Am I back?
Yeah.
What was the last thing you heard?
Truth and reality as synonymous.
Yeah, so I was saying truth and reality are synonymous. I ascribe to the coherence theory of truth. That is to say, sorry, not the coherence, the correspondence theory.
Yeah.
Don't want to bucket that up. Yeah. So I would ascribe to the same theory of truth as would St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle. That is to say that reality and truth are a one-to-one.
Yeah, I would agree. But it's our understanding that is the question. It's the truth. Like, truth would be our ability to verify concepts against reality. And I would say that what we are showing, though, is that that perfect truth would be reality itself, would be a separate conception, would be the perfect conceptualization of reality. Would you not agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. I would think that the ultimate truth, the truth of reality, the one-to-one replication would be outside of human means and human reach, as we were discussing yesterday.
Yeah, it would be infinite knowledge. It would be perfect knowledge of the world itself. So
it would require a limitless being, which humans are not, as we are finite.
Yeah, it would require a being which would have absolute perfect conception of the world to the point in which could. The thing is, I would say that this is seemingly contradictory, at the very least, and that it would only be able to exist within a being in which the contradictory could be mastered. And I would say that that's why Hegel says that, it is in the divinity of man which contradiction can be maintained. So, for example, it would have to be a being that was able to conceptualize its future conceptions of reality, because itself would change reality as it applied concepts to it, because reality would be changed because of its new conception.
Would this not be part of reality? Would this not be presupping upon the being the fact that a theory of time? Would it not be the case that this being's actions always would be the case, rather than having brought an influence onto the environment, onto the world?
Well, if you were to say that, then I would say that it's conception. Then, I think the problem is, it wouldn't necessarily remove the contradiction, in the sense that it would still have to conceive of itself, and that's the problem. It would be like the prime mover. Like even in Thomas Aquinas, it's the unmoved mover. Like, to say that it would have to constantly understand itself, but because it's infinite, its understanding would be constantly growing.
Infinite.
Yeah, so it's understand. So it would be in a constant cycle of self-understanding.
Where is the contradiction?
No, the point is, it's the contradiction is that as its understanding grows, so would its reality. So it would be in a constant state of resolution. It would be like becoming. It would be both being and not being simultaneously, and that would have to be resolved within.
But that is that was my whole point. That is only an issue if you are prescribing an a theory of time onto this being. It would be the case where you can have this seemingly contradictory, notion, because you are ascribing chronology, temporal sense, onto this being, when in fact this being can do both simultaneously, because it doesn't have this chronology, it doesn't have this temporal sense forced upon it.
Okay, but then at any given moment, it would be any given moment. It would be within itself. It's not something that would require.
Why? Well, that's where I'm objecting. I'm saying you can't say this being has any given moment. It exists within all moments.
I mean, don't get me wrong. This goes far beyond humans' ability to conceive, because this is atemporal. So,
yeah,
like if
we are temporal beings,
can't even show that you have to accept, quantitative understanding that is inherent within our being. That is it's a priori synthetic. So I mean, if I would say, that talking about this would be nonsensical. At the very least, I mean, we wouldn't be able to say what it was. We wouldn't be able to conceive of said being.
Well, I've just conceived of it.
No, you've conceived of a being which could, in theory, defy logic, and you've said that, but you could not tell me how. You couldn't tell me if it would actually do this.
Whoa. What law of logic does it deny? If you're going to say the law of
non-contradiction.
But I would reject that, because the law of non-contradiction relies upon time, because it is if you have something that is contradictory at the same time.
Of course, but then you're saying that it's outside of time, and then I was saying that because it's outside of time, that makes it beyond human comprehension and beyond human language.
No, I would argue that that is not the case at all. We can never have a true, full understanding of it, but we can conceptualize the being, and we can better our conceptualizations of this being.
Okay, and reach. So then the being is what we are conceptualizing. So if it, like, for example, with God and good is God. So it'll be a conceptualization of God as reality, because it is both. Because if there is a 1-to-1 ratio with...
Yeah, and this would be like kind of what was argued in objective idealism from Hegel.
Yeah, but the point is whether we would reach a state of absolute truth like Hegel argues for. Because Hegel argues
I would disagree with Hegel there, because I disagree that we can reach an absolute truth. I reckon we can approach absolute truth, but it's, to use an analogy, it's like the speed of light. We can approach it, but we can never reach it.
The reason we can't reach it is because we are quantitative, and that quantities exist, and as we understand the universe, it changes. And so we are in an infinite regress of conceptualization. And that's why I would say that's like Karl Popper's argument about epistemic... what is it about truth? Actually, it's about the ability to reach truth. But the point is that truth is not an absolute knowledge of the world, but the journey towards absolute knowledge of the world.
Well, I would disagree there. I would say that truth is a static feature of the objective world, and in fact, what you are talking about is our rationalization of truth, not truth in and of itself.
Well, you see, I mean, this is somewhat a word game, because obviously I'm prescribing reality as truth. So, like, you're prescribing reality as truth, and I'm thinking...
Yeah, we're engaged in semantic fisticuffs here.
Well, obviously we've got to get it out the way. If anyone's wondering why we're doing this, we've got to get it out the way. It's we have to overcome the language games that are facing us. So,
of course, I can't remember which philosopher said it, but it's language games.
Definitely not Wittgenstein,
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think the only way that I could really maybe try and overcome this is say, what would you say that human conceptualization was? Like, would you say that, or like, for example, if I was to say that it is true that there is, let's say, a table in front of me, would you agree?
Now, this is a seemingly very simple question, but it requires a very complicated answer. So, first we have to talk about the ideal table, the world of forms, versus the objective table that exists.
Excuse me?
So,
wait a minute, double back?
Well,
what was that about?
There is a table that exists in the mind of the person who is perceiving the table, and then there is the table.
Right. Okay.
So there would be, in fact, two tables. So I might just semantic the shit out of this and go, no, he would be wrong. There is not a table in front of him. There is a table within his head.
I think, well... So what you would say is that, and this sounds like almost...
There are two tables.
This is almost like what Blanchot says. I'll actually get a nice quote up for you just to kind of really give... weirdly enough, this was actually done on a module called... I did this on a module called Meaning, Truth and Language. Because this is the kind of things that we waste our time on in philosophy. And
yeah, you know what? Solving if there are tables in front of people.
And See if I can find it. So, right. Right. Let's see if I can find this quote, which I think might explain your position better. I think he calls it, I think all I need to do is right. He calls it, what does he call it? It's like the... He basically calls it the infinite experience, right? Can't be bothered. And he says this, right? He says, for me to be able to say, this woman, I must somehow take from her flesh and blood reality away from her, cause her to be absent, annihilate her, right? And this is what I think you're getting at. You're almost like it's our conceptualization of the world destroys the world for us. Okay? The world exists, but in a way that we can cohere against it and test our concepts against it. But we never are actually in direct relation to the world. Would you say that was the case?
Yes, I would say that's the case. I would say I would kind of agree with that in one sense, but also disagree in another, because I would also argue that there is a presupposition within the idea that there was a woman of flesh, blood, and bone. I would say that that woman was created by the idealism, and is in fact only in relation to, minds and ideals does that woman even begin to exist.
So you would say that like the woman herself is unknowable, because she would like it is only through conceptualization of the world that we gain any knowledge of it.
Exactly.
I completely agree. That is exactly what Blanchot would say as well. You would say that. That's why he says that. Actually, go on to another quote, which I think perfectly sums that up. In which he says, there it is. Can he act in such a way that death will be for him the force of the negative, the cutting edge of the decision, the moment of supreme possibility where his own impossibility will come to him and the world in the form of power? Or on the contrary, is the experience of one radical reversal, where he dies but cannot die, where death delivers him to the impossibility of dying? And that's why he says that, this is the reason why he's saying this, is because death for Blanchot is not like Heidegger, in which is this possibility of impossibility. Instead, it's a, how to describe it? It's a linguistic death, in which the individual loses themselves and this I in how they understand themselves. And what he's saying.
So this goes beyond just biological death. He would call something like ego death to be
death. Yeah.
Death.
Yeah. Because you'll be incapable of conceiving yourself as an object, holding yourself as an object. Now Hegel would agree. And so that's why Hegel says, like, the physical world does not, we do not conform to the physical world, but the physical world
conforms to us.
Yeah. And that's what he says, like, it's the application of concepts, but the proper application of concepts reveals the more of the infinite, which is implicit within the world. Now, would you not say that is a movement towards truth? Or absolute
as I've
truth?
already stated before, we can move towards truth. We can essentially create better rationalizations through Hegelian dialectics. I would say that we can sophisticate our minds in a sense. When we have two contradictory ideas that clash with each other and the Hegelian dialectic takes place, there is an evolution from the idea that results from these two merging concepts. And this would be, I would not say it is always more sophisticated. I believe there is often regression if we look at human history. But I do believe it is the case, usually, with exceptions, that when you have two ideas with a clash, you get a more sophisticated understanding of the world, which is a movement towards truth without reaching the truth ever. We can approach truth like we can approach the speed of light, but that is the beautiful tragedy of man. We can never truly grasp it. Exactly.
Hegelian, I would be characterizing morality as different to ethics. It would be the caprice of the individual. So I wouldn't say like that's not what I meant by the title, and I don't think that's what either of us mean. I think we mean ethics as a whole. And so what I would say is that the ethical life of individuals is what progresses with the better conceptualization of the world. As the conceptualization becomes more accurate, approaches truth, as you would say, what I would call reality, then I would say that the truth value of our statements has increased. And if the truth value of our statements has increased in regards to morality and ethics, then we have that is what moral progress is. Would you disagree?
I would disagree, because what you are calling moral progress is not any progress in the form of morality, which is an objective feature of the world. What you are describing is simply a sophistication or increasing rationalization of agents such as you and I.
So say that again. You would say that rather than moral progress, you would just say that it's just the increased rationalization towards moral progress. I feel like what you
no,
like.
No. This is not increased rationalization towards moral progress. It's just increased rationalization of features that are already in the world.
Well, yes, but our understanding of the world is what the world is the world we live in. Like we've already talked about that. Like the limits of our goodness are tied into the limits of our personhood, the limits of our epistemic justifications, which are tied into the institutions in which we live. And so,
sure, we are of course trapped within our world, within our ideal, idealistic forms. But we can also conceptualize and take ourselves out of our ego and take ourselves out of the body, and essentially conceptualize a being which looks down upon us from a period of absolute truth, of absolute objectivity. And what we would see from that being's perspective is that there is no moral progress going on, because the morals are static. Truth is static. What you instead see is, instead of, if to use an analogy, it's kind of like what Galileo discovered in heliocentrism. Morality and truth is not revolving around us. We are revolving around truth and morality.
See, I disagree. I think if a God's eye view was taken and it was to look upon us, and it was to see, and it was to judge our conceptualization of the world, and us acting within goodwill and trying to progress our morality within regards to institutions rather than individuals. I don't believe that morality is individual, by the way. I think we can debate that as well.
Oh God, this is where we're going to disagree massively.
Morality cannot be individual, because that would leave it to the caprice of individuals. Like the conceptualization of the world would lack verification, and therefore it would be incapable of showing correspondence with reality in the first place. Your statements would lack the propositional value of truth in the first place, what I would call truth, and I'm not sure what you would call it actually, and I don't understand why you don't necessarily use truth in the way that it would normally be used, because it seems like you understand it the same way. It's just that because of the understanding of it feels like rather than saying truth, you should say perfect truth, like perfect knowledge. That's what Christians usually do, and that's why.
Hang on. Truth is perfection, as we established earlier. To have the ability to understand truth, you would have to be a perfect being.
Well, yeah, but we even agree that there is a progression in truth dependent upon the accurate conceptualization of the world. And it's this accuracy which is measured. So if we were to say that truth was being measured against correspondently against the reality, and that's at the limits of our language, which is tied into the limits of our institutions and how much we progress language, then we could see that as our institutions progress and our language progresses and the concepts are developed and a more accurate conception of the world is given, then we are moving closer to what you would call truth. And
you had to slip it in there that institutions progress. That's probably going to be another point of disagreement.
Okay, so why would you say institutions didn't progress?
Because institutions by themselves cannot progress. Institutions have no agency.
Well, no, but
this is where Hegel's historiography falls flat on its face, because he conceptualizes history in terms of a grand narrative in which you have superstates, you have nations, you have movements like the Protestant Reformation or the French Revolution, and these have agency in of themselves, which is utter nonsense, as we'll get into.
No, it's not. And I think the point what Hegel's getting at is that there is basically a Minsky's virtual mind. There is a process going on that is independent of any given mind, operating within the epistemology of what is deductive reasoning, what is the dialectic. The dialectic is the proposition of a thesis, and then the antithesis, and then the synthesis. The synthesis is this conceptualization of the world and the conceptualization of self. However, the self is not an individual construct given by our body, but rather a linguistic construct and given by our language. We are understanding the world through these concepts.
Hang on a second. Didn't we have this argument the other day where you were arguing that the self and existence and being was pre-linguistic?
No, I said that you could have a ready-to-hand existence. There's a difference between self-understanding, which is the self as in holding yourself as an object, being self-aware, and this would be the personality, as Hegel calls it, of an individual. And then you have what is the awareness and conscious awareness. Now, if you are to ask the difference, I would say it is clear. Like the difference is being able to conceive of yourself as an object separate from the totality of your experiences, whilst an animal or another being may not. Now, a pre-linguistic being.
Yes, it's not really relevant to the debate. Just making sure you're being consistent.
Oh no, always. The point is, the point I'm getting at is that the way that we conceive the world and we conceive ourselves is not inherent to our being, and it exists within the language in which we use to divest ourselves from the rest of reality, from the totality of our existence.
I would absolutely agree. I would say that the self does come from language, but I do not think that language requires an institution.
Well, would you say that there would be a language of one?
There can be a language of one.
I would say that was...
I believe George Orwell actually wrote about this. You can have a language of one, someone could develop a language insofar of themselves and not require any external institutions or external people.
Well, it would be... do you know anything about Wittgenstein on this?
I know who Wittgenstein is. He's on my reading list. I haven't touched him.
Yeah, so Wittgenstein argues that there is no such thing as a language of one, that it's impossible because they would be incapable of aligning the symbols of their language with the objects of their experience. So they would be incapable of verifying whether it actually does correspond in the first place, and that they would need another individual to help for that to prove that correspondence. Because
I think Wittgenstein would be wrong there, because there is historic precedent for what I'm saying. Alphabets are extremely rare in history. It's only been developed every now and then. But I believe there was a Native American in Canada, which is an example of what I'm saying, who essentially isolated from his tribe. Kind of outcasted. I'll have to find this later so I can link it to you. But essentially, he stumbled across these books that were left behind by these European settlers, and from there he created his own alphabet, his own language, and it's like this unique linguistic construct. And this was created entirely by one man. In regards to correspondence, I see no reason why you can't have a semanticality or an arbitrariness all in of yourself. All you need to go is to make arbitrary sounds that are discrete and point to an object and go, microphone or headset, and there you go. You have the basis of a language there.
I'll see if I can find the paradox in which he sets up a dilemma. Right.
So perhaps Wittgenstein presents something a bit stronger, but I don't think what you've stated Wittgenstein states is the case.
If we were to, all language is at the mercy of rules, okay? That it's the games in which we play in which we are able to associate an object with a sphere of phenomenological experience. Now,
language games.
Yeah. The issue comes where would you say that if what he says is like this, I think this is what he says. I'm not sure if this is a direct quote actually, because I would normally go and get it from my copy of.
But if you're saying that someone cannot play a game singularly,
he says,
I see no reason why not. You can't play solitaire.
We can't make the rules of the game singularly. This is the issue. So how would you know that you are breaking the rules if you simply if you did not have an objective understanding of the game in which you are playing? Because the game would meld to your understanding of it. So the concept would be malleable to your own conception of the concept. It would constantly modify itself towards your thinking rather than an objective reality in which a language which is governed by. So there would be no ability to form a rule and hold yourself to it, because you would require, like maybe God could do that. It could create a language.
Well,
in which
I would disagree. Could you not section off parts of your mind and go, I am going to keep this as a consistent, it is not going to contradict to anything I, think. And if I have a thought that is contradictory to that thought is thrown out rather than the rule I have established.
See if this quote helps. This was our paradox. No course of action could be determined by a rule, because every course of action can be made out to accord with the rule. The answer was, if anything can be made out to accord with the rule, then it can be made out to conflict with it, and there neither could accord nor conflict here. So the point is that there could be no confliction, or it breaks the law of identity. Because
why could there be no confliction? Because
it would be a confliction with the self, and the self is the governance, is the legislator, is the judgment here. There is no confliction within the subjectivity of the individual. He would only be conflicting over unless he was to make it objective from himself.
You can have someone who is very conflicted on an issue and has an internal debate. I can internally debate many topics, and it's not as if it's predetermined within the mind that it's going to be, I'm going to go in one direction, because I can use my rationality to section off parts of the self and go, this self is going to think this.
Reason is objective of any given individual. Like the verification of one thing or another, deduction, is objective of any given individual. That should be clear. Otherwise, you are inducing reality. It's like
hang on, I would argue epistemologically we induce reality all the time. That's the only way we can act. Through inference.
Well, yeah, but I think that like inference is the beginning of a language, in the sense that it is the moment in which an individual may point towards a part of his phenomenological experience, give it a name, and then express it to another individual. but it is in the adherence of the rule by the other individual, which makes it objective of the individual who first induced it, and the language becomes a law unto itself. It becomes objective, and that's why Russian does not bend to the way that one Russian speaks. It is how Russians speak. It is the syntax.
Well, I could semantic the shit out of that and go, well, actually, here's some Russian dialects that contradict Russian rules, but I won't.
But this is okay. Yeah, you can have smaller subsects in language games, of course, but they are still obeyed by the players. And this is the
objectivity of the language is the rule, right?
Sorry? The objectivity of the language, yes.
So the objective part, the feature of the language, is the rules that constitute that language.
Yes.
So cannot I sit down, I'm like, your first hominid, and I'm looking at my phenomenological experience and go, hang on, I'm going to start categorizing my phenomenological experience. So, it's very chaotic at first, but I start creating categorizations and rules, and I stick to those rules. And I never break those rules, because I'm going to go, this is a rule, this is an objective feature of this language, and I am going to throw out any thought that contradicts with this language. So this rule would be an objective feature, and it would be in my mind. Therefore, you could have a language.
I think that there is one thing that is being presupposed here, and that you exist.
Typical philosophy.
You've already assumed that you are a self that is holding themselves as an object, and therefore able to hold them other objects of their existence as a given, because you've been respected as a property owner. What I would say is that you need to understand Hegelian recognition, that the self is only acknowledgeable once it is appreciated by another. It is through the appreciation, the recognition of another, that we understand ourselves as separate from the totality of our experience. The only other way we can do that is through what Hegel argues is through changing the world in our image, in which we create a distance between the self. But even this seems somewhat unsatisfactory, the slave mentality, because it doesn't allow for the true breadth of individuality which was necessary for moral progression within Hegel. The individual never truly forms. They gain an understanding of themselves in their actions purely. And the thing is that what they would see is
hang on. The individual has truly formed. Then perhaps the individual has not been sophisticated to the point of your satisfaction of the girls.
I would say that they don't have the necessary components of their personality that I would say that prevent, for example, things like schizophrenia, in which they would be able to understand themselves as in reference to a concept which is separate, for example, of a...
Would a schizophrenic not be an individual?
Well, no, but this is the point. Like, if you look at R.D. Laing, he argues that the recognition of an individual... This is, by the way, in case anyone's wondering, he's an existential psychologist. He argues that the personality development of an individual in childhood leads to schizophrenia when they don't have proper acknowledgement within the home. When they don't have proper recognition from the parents, they are incapable of performing a solid conception of themselves, an unmoving one, an objective one, and instead rely upon their induction of who they are.
Well, that sounds like a very controversial claim to me in regards to the psychology. Schizophrenia.
Of course. And saying that there was ultimately one understanding of how schizophrenia can develop would be ridiculous. But I think the point is clear.
Course. I think it's a bit Freudian for my taste, if you allow me to say that. I've both got parents who work extensively in mental health, and in regards to schizophrenia, I would argue that it's an issue that arises entirely out of the biology of an individual's afflicted brain.
I
Because
completely disagree.
if we are to, for example, scan a schizophrenic's brain and look at the neurology of it, we see underdevelopment in several key parts and an overdevelopment in areas of the brain that correspond with things like.
Of course you would. That what you've just described as brain plasticity.
Yes. So we would then look at the genetic factors that would lead to this degradation of the brain, this degeneration of it, from something that's fully working to something that's not, or the risk factors. It could be environmental as well.
Yeah.
But I don't think it would be due to what you described from that existentialist psychologist. I think it would more likely arise in adolescence, most likely due to high amounts of stress. I believe schizophrenia has been described as a cultural disease.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I think we've had a conversation about this before. I've described it as that before, but it can be triggered by a cultural disease. But stress obviously is a great input, and understanding that it is a neurological condition is very important. But when we're talking about what it means to be schizophrenic, is to have a problem with it's a personality disorder in many cases. Same with like paranoid personality disorder, or a lot of the time it's the issue of holding oneself as an object of their existence, and it's a problem with the understanding of their identity. I mean, even if we move past schizophrenia, which I'm happy to say that I do think schizophrenia is linked to
it's a very complicated subject.
Of course,
I would certainly agree. There's loads of neurological evidence that suggests that schizophrenics almost universally have difficulty with reading, for instance, because the brain has been wired in such a fashion that even someone who was a prodigy at reading, if they become schizophrenic, if they develop the symptoms of schizophrenia, you see a massive degradation in their ability to read and write. So it certainly does have a linguistic component.
Well, yeah, and I think that let's just if we were to move on to, for example, the biological component, I think we can both agree that developmental disorders are related to the understanding an individual has in the environment in which they are raised. And how they develop their understanding. In regards to the environment they are raised. For example, dyspraxia, dyslexia, even epilepsy is considered sometimes a developmental disorder. So neurology can certainly be affected by environment.
In complete agreement there.
I think that if we're talking about, obviously, schizophrenia there'll be a biological propensity. And as I think with all things, there is a way in which your brain will naturally develop, but the way in which it will continue to develop is based upon thought patterns, and those thought patterns reinforce certain dendritic spines and neurological pathways. So that's why schizophrenia can develop later in life, even though your brain may be fully developed. Obviously,
I agree.
Stress, for example, can be a trigger.
I would agree with him. My father, who is a professor in mental health, puts it justly, as in genetics and biology is what loads the gun. Environment is what pulls the trigger.
Yeah, but I think it also can be a preventative measure. Obviously, if you were raised in an environment which, helped you overcome these issues, if we were to identify, for example, a biological propensity, then we might help you live a life which avoided, certain key triggers.
Someone who is epileptic, who has a propensity to epilepsy, it would be wise to keep them away from flashing lights.
Well, I mean, obviously, it depends on the epilepsy.
Depends on the epilepsy, but that's the standard conceptualization of it.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I don't mean to
reductionist. Yeah. But I think what I'm trying to get at is, for example, how would you characterize the identity problems within society today? Because it seems to me that there is a plethora of developmental disorders now popping up in relation to identity. Now, I think that is because of the over-marketalization of social life in which the individual understood themselves. The concepts in which the individual held themselves as an object has been infiltrated by power and has become a shifting market. In the words of Gilles Deleuze, a self-deforming caste. It changes, it moves. the individual now no longer has rigid concepts in which to use to divest itself from reality, but is reliant upon the products that can be sold to it, the movements. It's the understandings which are given to them by corporations. For example, feminism. I would say feminism was one of those examples. I would say that...
Oh boy,
controversy. I would say that the social justice warrior, the mentality of the social justice warrior today is a market. And it has been, it didn't begin that way, but it has been infiltrated by a capitalist marketing strategy in which they sell a hegemonic, and by that I mean a way of life that prescribes a way of a type of being and judgment in relation to the concept the individual has adopted. They now know that they are a feminist, and so they must behave in a certain way. It's like when Zizek talks about the Me Too movement. It is entirely based upon this understanding of the perpetrator, this idealization of the perpetrator. It's a reactive ideological stance, and it pathologically requires the perpetration in the first place. It understands itself in relation to this concept. So when the perpetrator is actually non-existent, let's say like in the terms of like a patriarchal state, which I would claim, I would say then the individual cannot lose this identity. So feminism hit conceptual loss. And you could either reject the concept and understand yourself in a different way, or you can continue it. And that will lead to an inductive process. Now, this is the point. When it becomes inductive, the individual has no concrete sense of self, and they'll be moved a lot easier, which is why markets make feminism about, products, wearing things, reacting to certain social stimuli, and, create almost mimetically movements based upon the product of the products from social life. So they'll take something like, the future is female, and they'll sell that, and they'll create certain concepts around that to sell products. And through selling these products, the individual is given a notion of self when they buy them. They buy themselves, right? And
now you see, I wouldn't call it a self. I would call it an identity. And if you mind if I jump in here after that massive unholy rant and go into my unholy rant about modernity, I would be happy to take center stage. So I would argue that the issues that we are facing with identity go much deeper than what you're describing. Of course, capitalist exploitation of things like the social justice movement and fourth wave feminism is apparent. Capitalism has perverted, every single movement that it comes into contact with, and it turns people into unflinching drones looking for an aesthetic ideal, looking to reach the, for example, look at the Gillette ad. You had people coming out in droves to throw themselves in front of the spokes of, the horrible misogynists, while really what they were doing was shielding a giant corporation and giving them free marketing, because people are so obsessively, idiotically, attached to what I would call a fake identity constructed and created in boardrooms by marketing teams. But this capitalist exploitation is only symptomatic of the issue that we're facing. It goes much deeper than that, and I would trace this all the way back to, say, for instance, the Protestant Reformation. I would say this is where all of the issues that we are facing in modernity would start. You giggle, but let me continue with my thesis. So let us describe the situation of what happened, for instance, in England with the Reformation. Well, I would call the Protestant Reformation the greatest looting operation in history. The Enlightenment, as it is called, is perhaps the worst synthesis of ideas that have been used and perverted, more so than any other period in philosophy. What did we see coincide with the Enlightenment? We saw colonialism. We saw the rise of slavery. First, theological in nature, with the Protestants justifying it through the curse of Ham, and then Darwinist in nature, justifying it through the use of race. where we cease to recognize fellow human beings as having what you would describe as a self and what I would describe as an identity, and treated them much like we would treat animals, even less than that, perhaps even property. Continuing on through the stages of history, we saw a valiant effort from several different schools of thought to overturn this Whig paradigm. The Whigs being the British, aristocracy, which were quite infamous for this kind of ideology that was spread. So, continuing on, we saw this justification, and I think Hegel kind of falls into this trap himself, where he justifies the Protestant Reformation as being this, stage of freedom, when in reality it is in fact the era of slavery, colonialism, and injustice. What we end up seeing is historians and such slowly get overturned, perhaps, what I would describe as quite reactionary by Karl Marx, who developed he didn't lay the foundation down for socialism, but what would be the term? He consolidized it. He consolidized the ideas of socialism and communism, which is kind of a reaction to this. But drawing upon Hegel, he fell into the trap of the grand narrative history, which would, as Karl Popper described in his book, let me quickly try and remember that book. It was The Open Society and Its Enemies. That was the book's name. So, as he described in The Open Society and Its Enemies, this idea that Karl Marx would later develop dialectic materialism from Hegel's dialectics, this gave justification for the worst horrors in the 20th century, because every ideology could be rationally justified as it was just reaching an end state, the end of history. As Karl Marx would describe it, communism is a utopic existence. So yet again, the Whigs' ideology, the grand narrative of where we have justified and I better get into this quickly because I don't think I defined this before, but essentially, what is described as Whig history is where grand narrative kind of comes from, and it's this idea that history has directionality to it, and we are approaching in linear speed the end of history, which will be this utopic existence. So, using this, ideologies such as fascism and communism were able to justify their atrocities and their actions as it was just a means to an end of history. Now, as these ideologies collapsed under their own ideological burdens and weight, capitalism reigns supreme. And it justifies itself. Capitalism is unique in that it is kind of honest. It justifies in itself in ever-rampant consumerism. It justifies itself in saying there is no end to capitalism. It is just a continuous cycle. And that is why capitalism is dangerous in a sense, because I am not under the impression whatsoever that there is such a thing as late-stage capitalism or post-capitalism. It is adaptable. It will survive. It will turn over and over and over again.
But and in relation to the man of today...
Hang on, I'm getting to that. So, continuing on, I'll wrap this up. What we have seen is through this dialectics in history, we have seen morality and religion replaced with an ideology of capitalism, of corporatism, that is self-sustaining, self-replicating, and strips man of his humanity and of his identity. In conclusion.
Okay, so what is the man's humanity?
Man's humanity, it would be a self that is an individual self that is not given, but is developed from within.
Okay.
It is an identity.
What does the individual use to develop that self?
The individual would use his reason, his rationality. He would observe the world. He would not need external institutions. He would not need external people. But there would be an external world, and there would be him. And through that, he would develop his identity and his self.
Okay, so what within his rationality would allow him to come to terms with who he is and how he should live his life and essentially what he is as an object, what he should associate with himself? What would allow him to do that? Would it just develop out of thin air?
Well, no, it would develop out of his phenomenological experience.
Alone. So you would say that, like Heidegger, man is thrown into his existence of self.
Yeah, he is thrown into it. Like, I would agree with that kind of conceptualization of it. I remember
And so
my
before
very first
language.
memory.
So
I,
before
I
language.
remember my very sorry if I can just finish this thought. I remember my very first memory as being akin to coming out of a wind tunnel. It was like a kind of popping of the ears, and suddenly I was awake on my 4th birthday. So I can understand that kind of conceptualization of being thrown into self, awareness and phenomenological experience.
It's almost as if you hadn't, until that point, been able to hold yourself as an object, and something allowed you to hold yourself as an object. And that was on your 4th birthday, coinciding with the recognition that you were receiving from your parents and from the other people that just so happened to be surrounding you at that time.
Well, I would argue that's coincidental.
Oh, it's purely, of course. I mean, I would never use such things as evidence. But it seems to me that the method of understanding yourself, if it was inducible, then it would require what would be an inherent language. You would require a type of Cartesian knowledge. It would have to pre-exist your interaction with individuals.
So then the problem arises of, how did language just appear ex nihilo?
Oh, well, I would say language, like, it's like this idea of universal grammar. I would point towards Chomsky. I would say that just pointing towards like your experiences there. This idea of holding yourself as an object of your experience, which is the I, this identity, which you agree is a development and is like self-awareness. Why is it that you hadn't been able to do that before? Was it, if you were thrown in as a being, already aware of yourself, of the existence, with all the means to determine your own, to determine the difference between yourself and the rest of reality, then why is it that you hadn't divested yourself from reality, or why wasn't it imminently clear that reality was not separate? Because it seems to me that it's an epistemic development. Like, I would point towards that as if you are able to more clearly see the distinctions between you and other objects, and it is through appreciation of yourself as a person who can hold objects, which you are given by recognition as a property owner, as a subject from other individuals.
Well,
that allows
in relation to this topic, I would point to feral children's cases like Genie, which, without any language being taught to them, although they develop a very stilted and corrupted version of whatever English in Genie's case being taught to them later, because they are taught it at a late stage where the brain is lacking the plasticity that you have at an extremely young age as an infant. So we have cases of feral children like Genie who are isolated from institutions, from civilization, essentially. In Genie's case, her father was a paranoid monster who locked her up in a chair and kept her constrained there for like the first, I believe it was like up to 8 years of her life. She was in a dark room, force-fed, nothing was taught to her, just awful treatment. So she was a test case for this kind of like linguistic experiment, because she had never come into contact with language. And what we found was, once she was taught language, in a sense, she was able to remember these prior experiences, which indicates to me that there was a self there that could later communicate with the scientists and such that were testing on her. She could communicate them these past experiences that she had, and the only way she could remember these past experiences is if she had that idea of a self at the time she was experiencing these.
You see, first, Shadow is going to be absolutely tripping in the chat. I can just imagine him having a stroke. Now, I think... Now, I'm not going to agree with Shadow, who would probably tell me that this was semantic memory, and that your appreciation of it in this memory was just the expression of dyadic memory in relation to those conceptual links which were then formed when the individual was able to hold themselves as an object. Higher order properties, which I think was probably what Shadow would argue for. But I would say that if what you mean was the being conscious, well, yes. But just the being may very well be conscious, but that does not make them self-aware. They were aware.
I would disagree.
They were aware of their own...
All right. Shall we define consciousness? Because I would say, from my definition of consciousness, it would entail the self.
Go on then.
I would say that consciousness. Well, you're going to say consciousness is sensory input and output, are you not? Because I would argue from what we really mean by consciousness is secondary consciousness. That is meta-awareness.
Well, I mean, what I would say with consciousness, I would say that consciousness was the ability to have an awareness of reality, which would be more complex. It would be a process which is in relation to an ongoing process. So, for example, our bodily No, I'll explain. So, our body, for example, intakes data, which is reflexes, right? Like reflex nerve stimuli.
Yeah, the reflex nervous system.
None of that, all of that is semantic. All of that is completely unconscious. It's flat. It's 2D. There is no being there. And we can see that within our experiences of reality. Like if there is, before it reaches the brain, there seems to be no awareness whatsoever. However, once it reaches the brain, it is categorized by what I would call an implicit language. So I would say that there is a faculty which was given to us within our biology. This would be like almost genetic memory. So I would say that this is those words are the basis of experience of our, like, for example, texture of light, and it would be a necessary feature for problem solving, but it lacks depth. It would allow you to have, like, in the words of Alistair McIntyre, a world of pure sense data. It has texture, it has form, but it lacks any ability to ask questions or answers of it. Being able to ask answers outside of our existence is the breach of the totality of our experience, in which we can draw upon the infinite, which is the experience of another individual who can perceive an objective state of being. It would entail the existence of a common world. Now, that and a common humanity. So when you talked earlier, this is what I was trying to get at, that this idea of a common humanity could only exist if we accept that other individuals exist and their phenomenological experience are what are the justifications for the world around us. But more so, what it means to be human is this categorization, and this categorization can only form if we're capable of holding objects in rational categorizations which can be affirmed. Like, we would affirm that the concept, I mean, even if we look...
What you have given me in regards to consciousness has a self in it. because you have an awareness which, in me, at the very least, you're kind of trying to avoid it, but it's implicit in its meaning.
Well, this is why I say, like, it depends on what you mean. Like, there's some people call this the self of selves, don't they? It depends on what you mean by self. What I'm referring to as self is identity, personality, this understanding of myself as Lewis.
Well, I would call that identity rather than self, because self to me is being able to distinguish being able to distinguish from the environment. I would argue that you can create already robots
to distinguish from the environment. That is the ability to hold yourself as an object.
In such a case, we already have robots that can hold themselves as an object because we have gyroscopes. We can program a robot to go, here's a camera, it's on top of you.
Hello?
You were talking about earlier would be genetic memory. Instinctual. Sorry, I'll start from the beginning. So, essentially, oh God, I'm lagging. Give me a second. Am I back?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So as I was saying, what you were seemingly describing there, to hold yourself as an object, as a feature of consciousness, that would be a self, because you would be separating yourself from the environment. In such an instance, we can do this already in programming and in robotics. We can program a robot to have a camera on its head, to input sensory data, and it has a gyroscope that tells it where its location is, and that's constantly feeding into itself. And then it has that kind of instinctual reflection where it goes, okay, I'm going to upright myself because my programming tells me to do that when I'm at this degree facing this. And therefore, it has a sense of self. Would you agree?
Well, I mean...
in how I've defined that.
I guess the point and what I'm making is that with a sense of self, like when we talk about the self of selves in the first place, would be the ability to have a conscious experience of the world. Now, do I know if it's having a conscious experience of the world? I have absolutely no idea. But I think with reasonable doubt, I can give it, I cannot give it subjectivity. It cannot have interests. It cannot have a relationship with the world. So a computer may very well be able to experience consciousness.
But not subjectivity, because there would be no ghost.
Yeah.
There would be no ghost inside the machine.
I mean,
right?
we might be able to make a machine one day that experiences that, but I mean, that's a whole question. I mean, that's like for example, what we could debate is whether the China room and Minsky's virtual mind.
Yeah, bring all that shit up. Yeah. But it would kind of be getting off topic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Minsky's virtual mind, not so much, because I think that's a Hegelian point. It's a process in which the individuals within the room, in the China experiment, for example, would be unaware of. Now, for example, in the China experiment, they argued that, just to give people a brief understanding, that if there was a room that where people were translating English to Chinese, right? But everyone did their own procedural task in relation to in the translation. None of them actually spoke Chinese, but when you do this procedure, it'll eventually translate English to Chinese. None of the individuals speak it. Does the room speak Chinese? Now, the argument is, of course, the room doesn't speak Chinese. That's ridiculous. Minsky says, however, the room does speak Chinese. It is a virtual mind. It is the process itself that speaks Chinese. Right? It is a translation. It is a translator. It doesn't have a necessary self, maybe, but it has what I would say is what is implicit within Hegel. It is the mechanism in which, when applied within a mind, would be the translation of English to Chinese. And this is the point, the epistemics which give us ourselves as an object of our existence, our identities, our personalities, that is what I'm saying is the result of language. Now, if you're saying that there is a consciousness before that, I agree, right? But there is no identity, there is no personality, there is no ability to hold yourself as an object and correlate yourself within different objects of your experience. We even said earlier, you even said that the language in which you speak is what gives you the world and the concepts that you're in. Okay, so let's try and keep you to that point. Yes, so let's try and keep you to that point. That means that something that goes beyond our language goes beyond our comprehension. Okay, so when we're pre-linguistic, then all we have is a basic experience of the world. Our experience...
I completely agree, but what I'm disagreeing with you on is that from a pre-linguistic standpoint, you cannot create a language of one. And I think, just by the evidence of the fact that we have language and we know of evolution, we know at one point our ancestors did not...
No, I don't think you cannot attribute language to induction. You can say that, you cannot attribute language to a language of one, which can be explained through induction. Of course, we're capable of induction. That's thought propagation. That is implicit within our being. Of course, we're capable of that. We're capable of creating symbols. The issue is whether we can create rules which can hold ourselves to them.
Well, surely we must have had to, at some point, from a pre-linguistic standpoint, created rules that have developed the language of the most ancient on Earth, whatever that would be, like ancient Sumerian or whatever.
Like, for example, we could induce a rule, right? But there would be no way to objectify that rule unless we communicate it to another individual who then was able to hold us to the rule, or that we could refer to as justification for the rule. We must objectify the rule to be able to hold ourselves to it. Otherwise, it is at risk of our caprice. We could literally just go, no, that wasn't the rule. That, we could think that the rule was one thing or not another.
But in such an instance, you can hold an objective rule within the mind. You do not need an external means of verification if you have developed this rule within your brain.
It would be by definition a subjective rule. This is the difference between subjective idealism and objective idealism within Hegel.
Well, hang on. All right. Are minds objective features of the world? What definition of objective are we running off here?
Mind independent.
Well, then what you're presenting isn't mind independent, because what you are just doing is you're going to another mind and you're asking, "Hey, can you verify this for me?" And they go, "Yeah, sure, it's verified."
Is it
so
independent
what you have is two
of
minds.
Any given mind? Like, if you cannot,
any given mind. So if you have two minds together, you call that mind independent.
I would say that a conversation given by two minds, between two minds, is not a subjective event. It can be thought of as being tangible and provable because it existed within the world, and it can be verified against a corresponding theory of truth.
Going back to the very start of this conversation and idealism, what we don't have is a conversation that exists suspended between these two subjectives. What we have is two different conversations being created by two minds. And you kind of agreed to me in a Hegelian sense of this form of idealism. So why have you gone back now in terms of language when we talked about the table?
You misunderstand Hegel. Like, Hegel is an objective idealist. He is saying there is one self. There is not more than that. And what he means is the epistemic ability to divest themselves is language itself, which is a Minsky's virtual mind operating between individuals who are unaware of this procedural task going on. The way in which we verify and falsify each other's symbolic relationship with objects within the world, in which we make agreements on, which allows us to form a syntax and grammar, that is what allows us to give objects allows us to objectify our experiences and allows us to conceptualize ourselves as an object of our experience. Now, that is what I'm talking about. But because of that, there is only one way to obtain the self, and that is through language. The self is not induced. So if you look at it like this, for example, like if we go back, your criticism there was that. Well, would you like to reiterate it so that I can make sure that I respond?
Of the table, or the woman.
Yeah. So this idea of like a woman and how we apply a concept.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, I agreed in the sense. I disagreed in the philosopher that you quoted in saying that you had obliterated the woman I was saying there was never a material flesh, blood, and bone woman to begin with. The woman was created, dragged out of the mind.
Okay, yeah, but what he's saying is that the reality that is the woman, the indefinite experience, that was obliterated. Now, the point of what Hegel's getting at is that this common world can only exist in reference to other individuals. I'll give you an even better philosopher for this, which is Emmanuel Levinas. I think he's perfect for this. Let's see if I can.
I thought you were going to quote Immanuel Kant at me there.
Oh God, no! Duh.
Yeah, it's about to go. Whoa.
A meaningful world is a world which there is other, in which there is the other, through whom the world of my enjoyment becomes a theme of having a signification. Things that acquire a rational signification are not only one of simple usage, because an other is associated with my relations with them. Is it designating a thing, I designated it to the other. The act of designating modifies my relation of enjoyment and possession with things, places things in the perspective of the other. Utilizing a sign is therefore not limited to substituting an indirect relation for the direct relation with the thing, but permits me to render the things offerable, detach them from my usage, alienate them, render them exterior. There needs to be something to render it exterior from. Otherwise, if the other individual whom I understand to be a separate mind and have an enclosed phenomenological experience which I cannot experience as my own, I am offering that object to them. It is objective from me. That is what objectivity is. That's when you say that it's not mind independent. Of course it is. It's independent of any given mind. And if you say, well, it's not, well, what do you mean
by... Was it created by a mind?
It was created by a mind, but it can only be affirmed by another mind.
Hang on. So it was created by a mind, and then it is being perceived by another mind, right?
Okay, but then you've just described all of existence. Totality and infinity.
I'm just breaking it down. Mm-hmm. So in the earlier example with the table, there exists the objective table, which in this instance would be the sounds I've uttered out of my mouth. Okay. And there exists the table within the mind. So would it not also be a one-to-one translation?
The table would not be the sounds that you've uttered from your mouth. The table would be the phenomena that is given to the other and symbolized with the sounds you've uttered from your mouth.
So are you saying, for instance, that the words that are associated that I am uttering out of my mouth, that is the phenomena, or are you describing the experience that I have had when I am uttering these words?
I'm saying that for the experience, let's look at it like this. How do we know that the table is in front of you, right? Could you be wrong if you took a hallucinogen?
I could be wrong.
Okay, how would you know? How would
my senses are accurate?
How would you know you were wrong?
I could not.
Yes, you can. You're telling me that people who hallucinate are incapable of knowing that they are wrong for hallucinating?
Well, it depends on the strength of the hallucinogenic and their hallucinations. Of course, there could be mechanisms of which you could arbitrarily decide that this is a hallucination and this is not. You could say, this seems real to me, this does not. But in terms of real epistemological verification, no, there is not. I could be hallucinating.
That's exactly what I'm referring to. Epistemological verification. What verification is peer review. That is the ability to falsify a common reality, and that we are presupposing a common world, an objective world.
I'm going to stop you right there. So we have a person tripping balls to the point where he is seeing tables. How does he know from his phenomenological experience that he is also not tripping balls and seeing an imaginary nurse? How do you know about the peers that are reviewing your work while hallucinating are not in of themselves hallucinations?
Oh, well, of course. The point is that it is a corruption of the rationality that is implicit within your being. But the fact that there is a right or wrong in the first place, and we accept that there can be a right or wrong, And that, like, for example, if I take acid, I may know that some of the hallucinations I may perceive will be hallucinations and not part of my existence, have already presupposed a self who understands an objective and common world. You have to remember that we, throughout our totality of our existence, or at least our dyadic existence, in which we understand ourselves as, like, for example, with identities and personalities, we understand an objective and common world. Don't presuppose that and then tell me, would you be wrong for asserting that the table was in actual existence?
So are you saying perhaps that I am contradicting myself in that fashion by saying that there is a material world that is objective, and then I am also criticizing your point through epistemological verification and saying that a belief in peers would be just as epistemologically verifiable as a belief in hallucinogenic tables? Is that your point?
Like, what I'm saying is that, like, if your point is that we are that we would begin from a solipsism, if we begin from solipsism, then
we've both shot ourselves in the foot if we start from that position. We shouldn't be having this conversation.
No, I think that then we would rely upon your conception of rationality, which now has become, or truth, which has now become coherence, and relied upon the coherence of your existence and how much your understanding applies to it. However, if the table, then we come to the point of whether there is enough evidence, enough power given in your experience of other individual that it actually overpowers your experience of the table. So then you could say that an individual would be able to convince me that there wasn't a table, but of course there might be a table and actually they're all hallucinations.
Well, there is no spoon.
So the point is that epistemic verification in solipsism is impossible, but coherence is the only way you can go. If you're talking about a correspondent theory of truth, you are reliant upon other individuals. If you're reliant upon other individuals, then you accept that there is a common objective world.
I would just say you axiomatically state, but I can trust my senses, because to do otherwise would be to essentially give up the field of philosophy. To do so would be to say that I am not capable of truth, or even of even approaching truth.
I disagree. I think that it is an inductive process. I agree, it's inductive, but inductive reasoning can have, can be still more plausible. I think if there's a greater amount of predicates within our induction, I still think that would, lead us to the conclusion that our faculty of reasoning would allow us to see perhaps some inherent contradictions. But I guess the only way that you would actually be able to prove a contradiction would be to have an objective world. So that's the issue.
Yet again.
Yeah.
But
the point is,
so we have to
itself,
essentially.
I mean, this is the point. Like, truth itself, in the way that you've actually spoken about it, regardless, is the construction of being able to communicate with another mind. Because if it's not the case, that another
my construction of truth is a relation to reality. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that minds are an objective feature of reality, but you don't need them to create the self. You can have a language of one because you can correspond with reality and you can approach truth.
But you can only correspond with reality if there is ability to verify it. We've just been through that. You cannot otherwise.
Yeah, and we haven't gone past that because I'm still of the disagreement with you that you can have a language of one and you do not require peers, because from the same epistemological boat of absolute skepticism, all right, if we take the approach of saying you can only do it through peers, so we have to make the leap from absolute skepticism, because absolute skepticism defeats all. We can only confirm the existence of our phenomenon.
Well, I think that's wrong. First, you don't need to make a leap. Absolute skepticism argues that logic is not a provable part of your existence because sufficient reason cannot be given for logic. You cannot prove logic with logic. That's fair enough. But logic is necessitated by our thinking in the first place. You cannot deny logic. It is implicit. If you read the Tractatus, you would see that. Like in Wittgenstein, I would suggest it. I mean, don't get me wrong, philosophical investigations are better and it's probably more relevant for this. But even in the Tractatus, he talks about how the ways in which we think rely upon the ability to divest an object from the world. For example, hold an object, an identity, say some A is A, and that requires logic. That's the law of identity. The law of non-contradiction is another one. The ability for an object to be itself and not something else simultaneously is the ability to divest it from the world, and so is necessary to show that there is an objective existence. The point I'm getting at is that language and reason are the same thing. You would not be able to do this unless you were able to point towards a verification of that identity. You would be incapable of going, oh, that is a rock. What makes that rock a rock?
Because I would have the phenomenological experience. I would not have the constructs of logic, but I would still have the phenomenological experience, which is subject to the rules of logic as a metaphysical proposition. And then I would be relying on my sensory input, and I would look at the rock, and there would be a tag to that phenomenological experience, assuming that my cognitive abilities are complex enough for me to be able to have such memory. And I would be able to tag that rock within my phenomenological experience, that conceptual rock, and go, this is whatever. I could, utter a nonsensical stream of linguistic utterances in my head, and it would be forever associated with rocks. And then whenever I saw a rock from now on, I would think in my head, that's a Herbie-Derby. And, from now on, whenever I see a rock, it is tagged to the random utterance, the arbitrary utterance of a Herbie-Derby, and that it's discrete, it is productive, it is all of the features of a language.
You see, this is the point. Like, I don't think that you could you could have the specific mental ability of being able to manipulate your way of thinking within your field of existence. You're not born with free will. You are born with will. You would be moved by the language in which you are born, and you would walk through life.
Then yet again, I'm going to have to ask, how was it that hominids developed language in the first place if it requires language to develop language?
Well, what I would say, if they developed how we developed language, I don't think the point is if we and I never said that it took language to develop language. I said it took objectification.
Well, yeah, you said it requires objective verification. So therefore, the first person who ever conceptualized a language would have needed another person with language to verify their language for him to have a language.
Well, they would have to be able to.
So you need another agent capable of language. So either we have the extremely unlikely probability that two entities at the same time...
I think they both have the capacity for language. I mean, that's clear. That's the faculty of reasoning itself, which is induction. They're able to understand the idea, but it is only through what I would say recognition of each other.
So hang on. So one of them would have developed language first, though, and then gone to his mate and gone, hey, you have the capacity for language.
They would have developed an idea, but that idea would not have been made concrete without the other individual. You talk about the world of forms, but the world of forms could only exist if there was two individuals that understood that there was an object and that there was an essence within that object that was objective
so
that phenomenological experience. That is language itself.
I'm still rejecting that. I'm still rejecting that it's subjective.
Like Iris Murdoch even says that the world of forms would have had to have been linguistic. I'm pretty sure that's what she argues. So it's the idea. It's the world of ideas, and the world of ideas, the concepts in which we understand the world. If we were to just induce them out of nowhere, then I could induce blue was green. I could induce that this is not a table, it's a chair. Why can't I do that?
You could.
Okay, so why isn't it a chair?
Why is it not a chair? In your mind, it is a chair.
You see, I disagree. I think you're giving yourself far more control over the way in which you can apply logic.
Well, we both agreed at the start, right, that we do not bend to the material world. The material world bends to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are to legitimately have the phenomenological experience of seeing a table as a chair, that construct of a table in your mind would be a chair.
Right. You mean if we were to say that it had, for example, you would sit on it, blah, 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 that would be a chair.
Yeah.
So then you would say that is a chair. But then people would say, no, it's not. That is a table. So you would say that it would genuinely be for you a chair.
Yeah, it would genuinely be until that phenomenological experience has changed and your conceptualization, the ideal form of this object that exists in the material world, your ideal form of that changes to reflect a different phenomenological experience.
I think the issue is that we're presupposing an ability which I think is just incapable of being present within a pre-linguistic individual. Like it would be
it would have had to have been to ever develop linguistics. That's my whole point.
What, like induction? Induction would have to have been present. So
yeah,
thought propagation.
Yeah, it could have been. It could have been an entirely. Fine. I could take the stance, for instance.
If we were to look at it like this, for example, it's the fact that for this to be a prescriptive force from our understanding, it has to be objective from us. It requires a rule for us to conform to. And this is the point, like, for reality not to constantly bend, this is the point that Wittgenstein's making, for reality not to constantly bend to our understanding, then we require an objectification of our understanding, of an understanding. So, for example, like, you could go one day and you could say that, like, you could walk down the street and you could say, like, there are stars, like, I mean, this would be incredibly advanced. I don't know how they've induced this out of nowhere. But, there are balls of burning gas that are, definitely external from my experience. You could, like, point to a telescope, and say, like, that shows, like, these are actual, like, constructions, blah, blah, blah. But the next day you could go, actually, all of that was just a hallucination. Clearly, these are just, these are the gods. There is no objective world there.
Yes, because you're just changing all the rules. What I was proposing to you earlier is that you create a rule and you stick to it. Therefore, you are bending to the rules rather than the universe bending to you.
But like what you are presupposing there is that there would be a way to understand the rules outside of your own understanding. You would have to be able to hover. This might actually. Things. Objectification is produced in the very work of language, where the subject is detached from the things possessed as though it hovered over its own existence, as though it were detached from it, as though the existence
I see no reason why someone who is pre-linguistic could, through complex faculties, not experience an ego death and hover above themselves as you described.
Well, it's not ego death, because that would not be a hover over themselves. That would be the experience of totality. The ego itself wouldn't have come into existence yet.
Well, I mean, it would have, but detach the ego rather than kill it.
I think you're presupposing the ego. The ego is the object. That's like psychological continuity.
Well, hang on. So if we don't have an ego, then we have someone who is submersed in the totality of existence.
Yes.
Which doesn't make sense. They could not function as an organism if they were subsumed by the entirety of existence.
Well,
they would not be able to relate themselves from the environment. They would starve to death because they would see themselves as food.
No, they would be moved by implicit desires and the language that is already within them. It would be instinctual.
Wait. So there's language already within someone. There is pre-linguistic language.
I mean, like, there is definitely some language in the sense that they're in the sense of, like, basic understanding. I mean, like, I didn't have to learn the most fundamental. I would argue the most fundamental.
So there's genetic language.
Yeah, I'd say that it has to. I mean, like,
so.
For otherwise, experience itself would have been impossible. We would have never actually been conscious.
So we have established there is a language of one.
Well, there is a language in biology. It's not a language of one. It's not something that we can actually prove to be the case. It is the case. It's implicit. It's not something that can be communicated.
It is the case.
It's the whole point. I can't communicate it. Like, I could not give a blind man sight.
Well,
hang on. About blue.
What does communication have to do with this? We were talking about
because that's what language is about.
No. We were talking about whether you could epistemologically verify it. And now you've gone, well, actually, we do have a language that is, pre-linguistic, that is within someone. That would be a language of one. That would be a language that is entirely contained within one subject.
Well, it wouldn't. No, the point is that the individual would not have any knowledge of the language. It's not like it would not be. It wouldn't be language in the sense of communication. It would be language as in a primal understanding of reality.
We were never talking about communication. We were talking about epistemological verification. And now you've presented me an individual which has a language and means of epistemological verification.
Okay, please verify that blue is blue. I mean, go on.
Sure, I'm going to do it as this, pre-linguistic, linguistic, contradiction of terms there, individual, because my biology, my internal language tells me blue is blue. There's no argument there because it's hard-coded into me.
Yeah, so this individual would have no knowledge of it. It just happens to them. It would be like the desires that were implicit to them.
What do you mean by knowledge? What do you mean by knowledge? That might be where we are in dispute.
Knowledge would be verified thought. Like, it wouldn't be the pure thinking of the individual. It would be verified thought.
So verified thought. Well, he has knowledge then, because this thought has been verified. He has seen through sensory perception, he has seen the ocean. And then his eyes have taken that data in.
He has seen like textures and shapes and objects, but that's all.
Sure, he doesn't have. Hang on. He doesn't have the categorization ocean. So he's seen textures and objects, and he's seen that, and that sensory input, the data has been put into his brain, and then the cogs are turning. And it's going back into like that hardwired instinctual language that you're talking about, and it pops out, and it's not the word blue because that's an English word, but the conceptual idea of blue as an instinctual language.
It would be purely experience, and it would not allow for a temporal experience either, because that would allow the breach of the totality of the being experienced. The only thing it could at best do is reflect a coherence with a memory of a similar experience, and it would be purely imagery. So you would say one image against another, and say that but they wouldn't allow for a categorization in a broad sense. You wouldn't be able to have something like chromometric color. You wouldn't be able to have something like a rainbow even. You would be able to have an experience, because that would.
Hang on. If we have an instinctual language that knows colors, why could it not look at a rainbow and go,
doesn't know, like, this is the point. You don't know colours, you experience
Well, we define
colours.
knowledge as a verified thought, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, there is a method of verification, right?
Well, no, because you would say that what makes, for example, your memory of one object true. So, like, there would be no truth within this being.
Well, we have the objective rules, which is the instinctual language.
Wait a minute, that's just like, that's it. But this is the point I'm getting at. Like, for example, how would it verify its own existence?
It would verify its own existence
against what else? What would it verify it against?
Well, it would know that it came into existence, as I was talking about with my. It wouldn't
know anything but this experience.
No, it would know. Hang on. If we're granting it memory, it would know it came into existence because they would know there is a limit to its memory. Therefore, it could compare itself against that absence, same way that we would.
You've just applied a whole level of deductive reasoning to that. This is inductive. You've came to logical conclusions. Think of the being that is experiencing purely a moment of existence. It is feeling the stimuli.
Well, hang on. But you said it could access prior memories. It could access color and textures, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it could even problem solve in many respects. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. So it could problem solve. So it could sit down and it's going. It has some temporal, moment where it questions its existence.
But temporal moments. Yeah. Well, you've just given temporal moments. Like that's language.
Well, hang on. We were talking about a being that's trapped in a moment that has memory, so it has temporal moments.
Well, no, no. So like, you're presupposing.
It has time.
Like, it can have semantic memory. No, because
it has a bubble of time in which it exists, right?
Yeah, but you've taken memory to be diotic and not semantic. It wouldn't even be able to associate itself with the memory of the action.
with the memory of the action.
You even
Why
said
not?
earlier.
If
You
it
even
is
said
able, if it
earlier
is
in the
able,
conversation.
we've already established that this creature can tell things like color, right?
We already established earlier in the conversation that the notion of self, as a identity, as a
It's linguistic in origin,
Yeah.
yes, when we're talking about things like personality, but we're talking about just being a distinction
Being
between
in the
you
world.
and your environment.
Heidegger
Right?
being argument, we'll say being in the world.
Yeah, you know. So you have to have this awareness, otherwise, as an organism, you would perish because you would,
this
you
is
wouldn't be able to
twisted.
distinguish between yourself and edible food, and you would devour yourself.
Well, no, because it
you
would
know?
be moved by actions. It can be instinctual.
Yes, which would be this language.
Like, I mean,
we're
even
talking
this
about.
could be semantic. Like, you're presupposing that it would have to have an understanding. That's wrong. Like, this could be semantic. I have this argument with the Shadow all the time. Like, this is the weird thing. Like, you're arguing for a type of language which would make killing animals far worse than what I'm arguing for. Well, not even far worse. It wouldn't make it worse. It would really just it would make it more clear. It would make it more clear that it would be wrong.
Is that I don't think animals are even at this point of development.
Well, what? Wait a minute. So
I don't know if you want to get into veganism in our discussion about
the
moral
weird thing
food
is, no, because what we're talking about primal beings who are pre-linguistic. So whatever, like, it doesn't matter if we're talking about animals or not. We could be talking about, like, pre-linguistic humanoids. The point is that their experience would be the same, right? There's nothing that would modify their experience. They have the same faculties, they have the same brain.
Between animals and this humanoid.
What, sorry?
So, like, what was your point there?
That their experience of reality would be the same.
As compared to?
Us. And our experience of reality, which can enter a present at hand state.
So are you equating these hominids with our current modern day self? Because that's not what I'm describing here. I'm describing a being which is in a limited sense, in comparison to us. Because I wouldn't disagree with you about institutions and other.
You've just said that
I'm saying that not necessitated.
No. Let's double back. Like, you've just said that they would have the ability to have temporal experience. You've said that they have the ability to divest objects from the world. What faculty have you denied these pre-linguistic beings? Because what I talk about as self, I say the object, holding ourselves as an object, personality, the ability to know who you are throughout a temporal experience, to have an I, to have a who, to have an understanding which transcends the moment. Now, you say that is pre-linguistic. So why don't animals?
Well, hang on. It's pre-linguistic linguistic because we're presupposing that this humanoid also has this inbuilt ability to be able to go, yep, react to this, react to that, which is what I've just been arguing, that there is a concept of one. If you're questioning me on what would distinguish us from that creature, well, yet again, I would talk about temporal sense, I would talk about meta-awareness,
you just said that
you seem to be thinking that I'm granting.
Yeah, well, so tell me what temporal existence you granted it.
You agreed with me, right?
It had memory.
It has the ability to access memory, right?
Okay, and not associate itself with those memories.
Not associate itself with those memories. Well, I'm asking, how is it not able to associate itself with memories if it's able to do things like associate color with phenomenological experience?
See, I don't think it could associate color. I don't think it could hold objects. It could experience them. You're the one that's arguing the opposite.
Without holding it.
You're the one that's arguing that it can hold objects. I'm arguing that it can't.
Hang on, it could experience color without holding it. How is that possible?
It could experience objects without holding it because it would be instinctual. It would be determined by the semantic process, which was then being interpreted by the consciousness. It would be pre-linguistic. It would be pre-conscious. It would be subconscious process, which then the being obtains. But for your case to be true, they would have to be able to hold an object of their experience and then point to it and create a language of one and hold themselves to that. That would be an objectification and hold themselves to that.
But we have established, right, that there is an objective language here, right? There is instinctual language.
Right. Yes.
Right. So,
well, objective
from,
language.
From
wait
that
a minute.
objective
Wait a minute.
instinctual
Wait a minute.
language.
Instinctual language, yes, but it's not a language that the individual actually learns, knows, anything like that. It's implicit within.
Well,
the being.
sure, but there is a language, right, that has rules that are unbreakable.
Well, yeah. Well. I mean, until we hit linguistics.
So when this person is
you can
later
reconceptualize.
on,
You can reconceptualize once you hit linguistics because it allows you to make conceptual links. Because you can hold objects of your experience and begin categorization.
How are you reconceptualizing things that are subconscious?
Well, no, like for example, like the understanding that something that, like for example, let's say something like desire, for example. It's possible that once you categorize desire and you come to understand desire more greatly, you're able to have your desires around the self are changed. It's like when when Hegel says that it's like a lens looking through a lens. Well, you would be changing, you'd be modifying your object by observing it. By observing yourself as an object of your existence, you are modifying what it means to be that object. You are changing yourself. When the mind considers what it is, it modifies what it is.
But hang on. So are you suggesting by the mere notion of being able to hold yourself as an object, you are fundamentally changing things that were prior to this objective?
Well,
prior to this,
you are given fundamentally the freedom of will.
So are you saying that it is possible once you have developed linguistic? So hang on. So we have an objective language of one, and then from there you develop a more complex subjective language. Which then breaks the subjective language of one. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that there is, like, you know fine well what I'm saying, and that is that there is a inherent language within a being which is subconscious, which they are not aware of, which gives them an experience and a consciousness, but a language which is developed by the conscious mind, which attempts to induce the
rewrites the subjective,
the totality of its existence. That would be, it would not be able to verify the own rules from which it holds itself. It wouldn't be able to objectify those rules and hold themselves to the rules.
Well, I'm still struggling to understand how we have a feature that makes up the core of your consciousness, of which this entire language is built across, that somehow through developing a more complex language from this instinctual sense, you've gone back and torn up the foundation without collapsing the own language.
Wait a minute. So say that again.
So essentially, all right. So here's my point. All right.
Okay.
This instinctual language is the foundation. All right. And then on that foundation, you have built a house which is this complex language. How is it then that you are able to tear up the foundation of the instinctual language without collapsing this language that you have developed?
Well, it's about, like, because certain concepts can come to replace the concepts in which you have held. I mean, it depends on whether what you'll be doing is fundamentally changing your biology, which can happen through volition, which is why brain plasticity is a thing, in which we talked about earlier. The individual is able to reconfigure their brain in relation to their observation of the brain through their own volition, through the freedom of will. That is how they are reconfiguring this language, which is implicit within them, which is why a greater conception upon this very basic understanding can form great conceptual links from colors, textures, and feelings. We are able to understand things like quantum mechanics. It's not that it's ultimately
because we build upon a foundation, and then we build a next layer, then we build another layer, then we build another layer. What I'm suggesting is, if we're at the level of quantum mechanics, and then we go back to the very core of the instinctual language, and we rip out the foundation, that entire thing collapses.
No, but
it no longer makes sense.
I think you're misunderstanding the point.
Let me finish the point. So if you had a subjective language built off an instinctual language, it would tear itself apart by taking a part of the foundation.
I understand what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is that the driving force behind the individual is what is able to be changed by this new conceptualization, because it would be an awareness, because the awareness of reality has changed, in which the drive is, it works upon. For example, we would able to be consider food. Like, for example, we would have a natural understanding of food, in which, for example, smells, tastes, blah, blah, blah. And through a greater conceptualization of that, we can gain food that we like. We can gain notions of Italian food and greater conceptualizations of that. And we may no longer be instinctually bound to what we would have ate within the wild, which would have been that which smells nice.
Sure. But
and that's what I'm trying to point out. I wasn't trying
to
say that we would
hang on.
rip our subconscious minds out of our bodies.
Because I think you're misunderstanding my point. So sure, there probably are instinctual parts that are like territory, or like, 9 degrees of separation away from the core of the instinctual self.
From the point
the point I would like to make, the point I would just like to quickly interject is, surely there is a core to this instinctual language that cannot be torn up without collapsing the language it is built upon. Continue on.
Well, yeah, like I agree. Like, there are certain concepts that if they were totally rejected, like, for example, the ability, like what it means to see would alienate all sight from the individual, which is why blind people could have the words in relation to sight and use these concepts intelligibly within a sentence, yet have no understanding of the phenomena in which they entail.
So if this is the case, then there is a means of objective verification within the self, because there is something that is objective that you cannot tear apart without self-defeating, without tearing up your own language. Therefore, there is a means of comparison and contrast between the subjective language built upon an instinctual language.
What would you contrast it against?
The objective features of which your language is built upon, but cannot be changed without killing the language.
All you have is the experience. What would you contrast this totality of experience against?
Well, I've told you, it would be against the objective core that you agreed with, cannot be changed without collapsing the entire language.
But you would need to have knowledge of that core as an object that is separate from your own existence. What I'm saying...
Hang on. Of course you would have knowledge of this core, because an example you gave was the idea of sight. And I have knowledge of the idea of sight. That's not linguistic, that's pre-linguistic.
No.
It's sensory input.
No, the idea of you seeing and you having memories in regards to your sight, which you understand and you can categorize off as experiences, which you can create conceptual links. No, that's linguistic. You having seen things, seen textures, shapes, and objects within the world, well, that's pre-linguistic.
That's pre-linguistic, right? But what you just talked about as being linguistic, that is built upon that pre-linguistic concept, right?
Okay, yeah, it's built upon it, yeah.
So you cannot change the pre-linguistic concept without killing the linguistic concept. That's my point.
Okay, yeah, but your point only shows that there is an inherent understanding of the world before the self which forms. And
now what I'm
understanding is implicit within our being. But the difference between being able to categorize within that experience is different. You are saying that there is something outside of that experience which can be which allows for the categorization. There would be no ability to form the rule and hold yourself to it.
No, because the rule is already instinctual. The rule is biological, and that is you compare and contrast against the verification.
Okay, so I agree. You cannot deny colors. You cannot deny shapes. You cannot deny forms.
Yes. So in that instance, if you cannot deny these things.
Something more complex, like a chair, a rock, the self.
Yeah, okay. So the whole reason you do peer review is so that you can verify it. Now we have a means of verification within the self, because we have the language.
What can we verify, please, Magnus? What can we verify? We can verify that it has colors, shapes,
everything you just said.
Sense data. That's it. So all we know...
Okay, so we can verify things.
So we have reached the end of Cartesian doubt, and we have come to the fact that there is something thinking within the mechanism that we are existing. Wow, great. We know that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point. You can do a language of one. I'm not saying you can get far with it.
That's not a language of one.
It is a language of one. We have a means of epistemological verification.
No, you have a means.
That was the whole
You do not have a means of epistemological verification. There is nothing to verify against except for that blue is blue, yellow is yellow. This is implicit and inherent and necessitated by your sight,
Yes,
by your
these are
smell.
objective
But that
rules.
is all you have. You could not understand something
Sure,
like
sure.
pizza from
That is all
taste,
you have.
smell.
That is all you have, perspective philosophy. I'm willing to say that is all you have, but you still have a means of objective verification without any external agents.
But no questions or answers can be asked of that. It is implicit. Okay? So, there is no...
Yes,
there is no truth.
Yes, we
There
can
is no-
ask questions. We can ask questions about colours. We can go, is this red or is this blue? And then we can verify it.
No,
And then it's true or it's false.
We could compare two objects, red or blue, and understand the difference. We could differentiate between two things, which is an implicit phenomena of our experience, but we could not hold them as objects. We could not categorize them as being red.
Well,
being
hang on.
Blue.
There's already an implicit categorization there, red and blue. A phenomenological
There
experience.
there is an experience, but there is no experiencer, and there's no there is an experiencer in the sense there is a consciousness.
There is an experiencer,
but there is
because
no
we have a
there is no
subjective
self,
language to this.
which could then hold these as objects.
Well, this is my whole point, but we have constructed a self entirely out of internal reflection rather than external agents, because we have looked internally, we have means of objective verification for the language that is developed, for things like shapes, colours, etc. So therefore, we have a very simplistic self and a language of one.
But this the simplistic being the word, right? Like it lacks all real correspondence to reality. It only links to the totality of our experience. We could say that comparing our experience against itself, that there is, for example, blue, red, yellow, and we could induce that this object was an object of our experience. But if our experience changed, for example, if our perceptions changed and our understanding of the world changed, then so does the language. So if the language tried to build and become more complex, understanding things like tables, chairs, anything that is not implicit within our overall experience that is pre-linguistic, that is subconscious, there would be no means for verifying it.
Then the language would collapse, as I said earlier. It's self-defeating.
Okay, so if that's the case, and there would be no means of verifying a rule against a rule against the actuality of your experience, then what you're arguing for is solipsism.
Well, no, because I've already told you from a position of absolute skepticism, it gets you nowhere. So what I'm saying is that you can have... So where I would go from this instance is that eventually you would be able to, from these simplistic colours, shapes, and etc., but are all verifiable, you would be able to create a more and more complex language, and you would be able to precariously balance a language that doesn't tip over and collapse.
How would you create a more complex language?
Well, for example, if we have coherence of shapes and colour, we can create written language.
It's strange that it's become coherence now. That your understanding of
truth. Yeah, because it becomes correspondence as we develop in complexity. So then
correspondence
this is how
implies an objective world.
Yeah,
and how did you
an
reach
objective
the,
world, which we'll develop earlier?
But how did you?
I reached
the totality of your experience.
I reached it axiomatically the only way you can. Pure solipsism is impossible to defeat.
It's axiomatically impossible unless you have an understanding of something which breaches your experience in the first place.
Well, we've already done that because you said we can collapse the language. So if there is a collapse of the language, then there is something outside the totality of experience.
No, like what you say is that there is something in which you do not understand within your experience. That is not a collapse. That is not. That does not give you information that there is something beyond your experience. The only thing that can give you an idea that there is something beyond your experience is another experiencer, a mind.
No, because that could just be within your experience, as I was arguing earlier. From the ideal perception, there is no other mind. There is a mind that has been created by your mind. It is within your experience. So if you are to say, but epistemologically, my method of verification is within my experience, you would have to say the same thing about another mind.
Well, what you would have to say, like the only point that I would say that you would have to induce is that when you see another person who presents themselves as another, so they hold themselves in relation to, having looking the same, the same faculties, having volition. And this is the point. Like you would recognize that there was something different about them that you were unable to change.
How would I? Hang on. How?
I'm explaining.
How?
Well, I'm trying to, wanna
Sorry.
What I would say is that what gives you this knowledge is the inability to change the ways in which they behave. And that since they are behaving in such a way which does not correspond with the totality of your existence, and you cannot forcefully change, you cannot change their reactions, you cannot change their behaviors, then there is something within them that goes beyond your experience.
Well, that's total nonsense. If you're tripping balls on acid, you could hallucinate negative responses as positive responses, and positive responses as negative responses, and you could completely conceptualize a different mind as something that it is not.
Well, you could
so this method of verification
it's not.
falls flat on
It's
its
inductive.
face.
Of course, it's inductive.
Yeah. So, well, in such a case, your method of epistemological verification holds the same weight as mine.
That bridging the mind-reality gap could be done without anything but induction? No, the only thing that can be done is coherence, and then coherence is what leads to correspondence. But that
I agree. But
yes,
what I'm telling you is that your method of verification is no better than the method of verification I have presented in contrasting parts of the mind with the foundation of which that language of the mind is built upon.
Well, it is, because the beautiful thing about another mind existing is that if I have any change in the totality of my experience, they can use the experiences they have to point to phenomena in the same way and verify
But your experience of them is all you have. So your experience change would include them. Therefore, this other guy is telling you you're tripping balls on acid is going woo, 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 in your acid trip.
Yeah, I mean, the only way that you, let's be honest, the only way that you could understand yourself as an object is if from understanding them first as more than an object.
No, I disagree. That's the entire point of the debate.
I don't see how you can disagree. I don't see how you can.
Well, I presented it.
Well, you disagree.
Do you want to move on? Because it's clear we're not getting much further here.
Well, I think it's very important, though. I think it's incredibly important, because I think unless you're willing to say that the individual's consciousness is able to implicitly hold themselves as an object, in which case, for example, like as we've said, animals would have the same experience of reality as humans.
No, I disagree that animals are even at that stage.
In what way? What separates them?
The fact that they do not have the
capacity for language.
They do not have the capacity for language. They do not have many of the features of stuff like the capacity for secondary consciousness, etc. Essentially, an animal would be. An animal is.
But the capacity for secondary consciousness is the capacity of language, which allows for the development of personality and the holding yourself in.
Well, sure. Well, like everything that's cognitive can just be boiled down to language if you want to.
The point of what I'm.
We could even describe DNA in terms of language.
But it seems like you're constantly contradicting yourself, because first, then it's like language is either in the development of self and consciousness and awareness, or it's not.
Where have I said that language is not in the development of consciousness?
Because it says that so there is an innate language which gives us the world. Are you seeing that?
That was your point. I was hammering on you because you brought that up.
Okay, so how else would you get the world? Like, it must be induced from somewhere. Like, there must be a position in which we gain some sort of phenomenological experience. Otherwise, it would be unknowable. There would be no consciousness.
Well, that's a confusing word salad. What do you mean by consciousness again?
Awareness.
Awareness, just pure awareness. Well, I don't think that's what we mean by consciousness. I would say meta-awareness is what we mean by consciousness. But if you're just talking about sensory input and output, all you require is an optical nerve. same as a camera. In such a method, we can call basic machines like
That is clearly
define
not.
awareness.
First, that's exactly not what I mean by consciousness.
Well, I don't know what you mean.
So what you're
Please,
saying,
define awareness.
like for example, that you would have to be able to, like, consciousness would be the ability to feel and understand reality as having for example, the imagery in your head which gives you or the experience of reality, whatever it is, might be imagery because that.
I would reject that animals have an understanding, just to bring it back to that point. But go on.
But this is the thing, like it would be the product of an experience that is built upon a subconscious experience. It is a conscious experience would be one level above the subconscious, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, consciousness is built upon the subconscious. Like,
right,
that's
and
Psychology 101.
Okay, yeah, but all of what consciousness is an understanding of those semantic processes that are subconscious, right? So it would be an appreciation of reality.
I don't appreciate
self.
this definition.
No, but it would be an appreciation of reality within our organism, of like colors like blue, red, textures and all this. That is what we would have. In what way do animals not have that?
Well, I do not have an understanding, as I stated earlier.
But like we would not have an understanding pre-linguistically. We would only have the totality of our experience. We would have experiencing. What do you mean by understanding?
Sorry, you cut out there. I misheard.
We would only have experiencing. We would only have experiencing pre-linguistically. What do you mean by understanding?
Well, you use the term understanding, and I'm rejecting that. An animal would understand, because I would say there is no conceptual. There is no man behind the wheel. It is a machine with sensory inputs and outputs, and it's an equivalent to an automaton. It's not like a human being that has this meta-awareness that drives it forward.
Then you're saying that there is a self, that it's the self that divists reality, that divists all experience into some sort of conscious awareness, that it is this held object. That means the self must be implicit within our mechanism, and not only an experience of like basic implicit categorizations within our mechanism. But it must be an understanding. It must be the ability to hold yourself as an object. You must have to say, for this to be the case, that you are born with an understanding of yourself being divested from reality.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And okay, so how would you say that you were given this object? Is it just that it
Well, it'd be that instinctual language we were talking about earlier. I think you've brought up a very good point, and it supports my idea that there is a self driven from this instinctual language within humans.
But why wouldn't this exist in animals? This is so contradictory. I don't understand. Why wouldn't this exist in animals? They have the same faculties.
Well, if we, I'm not a biologist, but we could bring out, and do a bunch of neurological scans on animals.
We'll do neurological scans, and we'll see that, for example, dogs on MRIs react exactly the same as humans when proceeded.
Completely false. I have looked into the research of it. They're mechanistic in terms of how they learn and how they respond to the environment. It's why Pavlovian conditioning is so effective.
They aren't linguistic.
It's almost as if they don't think like a human thinks.
Okay, because we think linguistically.
No, it's almost as if there's no thought there to begin with. Even pre-linguistic thought. There is no ghost within the machine. So if you want to start throwing some research at each other, we can do that in the next debate on veganism.
Yeah. I'm happy to do that. But I mean, the point of what.
If you want to debate theory of mind, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we've been debating half the time. But
well, yeah. Well, we've been we haven't so much been debating theory of mind as personal language, which is a component of theory of mind.
But this is the thing, what you're saying is that if you're talking that there is an implicit language, then yes. But if you're talking about a personal language, which is a subjective categorizations built upon language, which allows us to use epistemic justification, which we are talking about in the first place, then all you've said is that there is an ability to understand certain base components of reality against the mechanism which we are, But that does that would
So,
not allow.
so hang on. So we have rules that don't change, that is inherent within the self, but we can compare and contrast a language against, therefore giving us the means of epistemological
No, we
verification.
can't. Like, this is the thing. What would you you would contrast? You can't contrast it. It would be within the self. Like you wouldn't be able to contrast it against.
Of course, you could contrast it
Against
because
what?
hang on. Can you not have a thought that is false?
But you said, well, that's the point. That the only way that you could have a thought that was false is about a common reality, an objective world.
No, I never. That's the point you raised, but I'm saying that's not true because you could raise a thought,
Then
and
you
could go,
aren't arguing for a correspondence theory.
No,
I mean, a correspondence theory.
I already said earlier, but a correspondence theory of truth comes later, once we have sophisticated our understanding and have the complex linguistic capabilities to be able to do so. So what we're talking about now
gives us verification.
Language gives us a form of verification. There is epistemological plurality.
There is induction. Yeah, okay, so there's two separate kinds of reasoning. We agree. There is induction and there is deduction.
All right, so
And
there
they
is
are
a
separated.
method of which we can epistemologically verify through colours and shapes and whatever we can against ourselves within a thought within our head and compare and contrast that against the foundation as it is built on top of that foundation. And we can then value the truth or false value of that statement and determine epistemologically if it's verified or unverified.
Where in your experience, in your primal language, would it tell you if a table is in fact a table at all?
Shapes.
Okay, so
I would associate pre-linguistically, instinctually, the idea of a table with the idea of a certain shape.
Okay, so you have the shape of a table.
Not the linguistic,
so tables don't change shapes?
No, tables don't. If you're talking about the objective table, no, tables don't change shapes unless you change it.
Of course they do. Of course they do. I mean, the concept of a table, like the tables, the categorization, like there are multiple.
Yeah, okay. So you can have a spectrum of shapes that you associate with a table.
Okay, and what is and what allows for the greater what allows for this categorization that it is a table, not a chair, not a bench, all of these different things? What would it be? Would it be the shape?
Yeah, it would be the shape.
Okay, and what about?
And I could be a real semantic arsehole on this and go like a definitional nihilist and say actually there was never a table to begin with. It's all just molecules.
No, but let's look at it like this: the existence of the table is the concept that's applied to reality. So if you are the only thing holding yourself to these rules, then if the rules changed, the table would change, and say you would not be wrong.
Yes, I have agreed, and I would say the language would collapse.
You could not be wrong if you hallucinated a table. This is why you would never be wrong to say that. You could never be wrong in saying you experienced something. That's the exact same with your
method. Hang on. This is the exact same.
I could say that I was wrong in relation to someone else telling me that I'm wrong, because it's a correspondence theory of truth, which you argued for.
Yes, but the correspondence theory comes later, and what I'm telling you here is that it could be you're hallucinating this individual who is saying you were wrong. Your method of verification is the exact same in weight as my method of verification.
Only before we accept the existence of other minds, and once we have other minds, then it becomes correspondence, and the weight of another individual.
But the existence of other minds is within your experience. You cannot communicate.
Which we agree.
So therefore, it is within the totality of your experience. The totality of your experience can be wrong. It is the exact same method of verification, but I'm talking about.
The totality of your experience would lead to an appreciation of the infinite of your of experience, something which goes beyond the knowable. That's the point. Because if you accept that there is something that goes beyond the knowable, and that can only be in relation to another being which experiences, then we have a correspondence theory of truth. And that would supersede coherence.
Yes, it would supersede coherence, but what I'm doing is I am knocking the legs out from under the correspondence theory of truth. So we are left with the coherence theory of truth, because what I have done here is I have used your method of verification.
Okay,
I've contrasted
so
against mine, and I've found no difference because yours relies upon the same thing.
No, because the difference is that if you were to say that there was a language of one which allowed you to understand what a table is, then the rules would be modified by your understanding of the rules, which means the rules are never stagnant, they're never objective.
But we agreed earlier that
Can
there
you
are
not
rules
understand
that are integral, that cannot be changed.
The
Otherwise,
rules are
you would
not
collapse.
integral and cannot be changed. What you're pointing towards is base concepts. These broader conceptualizations which allow the links in the first place, the links themselves, for them to be objective, have to exist beyond your consciousness. Can you not see that? Like
is a shape hang on. Is a shape objective?
What, like a geometric shape? Yes.
Yeah. All right. So is the conceptualization of a shape within your mind of like a square, is that something that cannot be changed?
For it to remain a square, yes, it can be changed. For me to be able to say this is a square, it can be changed. Can the shape be changed? No. But can my signification between the object and the experience, the object of the experience and the actual symbol, that is malleable, which means the language of one becomes incoherent because you cannot show a contradiction.
Because by trying to change it, you collapse the entire language. It is self-defeating. It is essentially, what you are suggesting to me is the same thing that you can do with any language, is that I can just start changing the rules, all right? And in doing so, I could, change the concept of a square to a different shape and etc. But in doing so, it would be incoherent and incomprehensible.
What I'm saying is that the concept of a square... The concept of a square as having the rules, having four sides. Actually, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's make it something like a triangle. So now we can talk about Pythagoras' theorem, right? The ability to point towards a triangle as having three sides, as always equaling 180 degrees, and so on. That has to be stagnant for us to build concepts upon it, right?
Exactly, and it is stagnant because if you change it, your entire conceptualization of the world collapses. It would be a suicide, a linguistic suicide.
Yes, this is what you're arguing my point. It's as if you would be incapable of holding an object for an extended period of time unless there was a method of objectifying it from the totality of your experience if it is not implicit within your experience.
No.
Because unless it is explicitly given to you by your experience, then the rationality which you have induced, if that changes, there is nothing to hold you to the rule in itself. Can you not see that? The rule changes
because you cannot
with
change
your
the rule.
thought. But you
can do. Hang on. You can do the exact same thing. You can do the exact same thing with any language, and your external method of verification does not provide a solution.
For example, I can't make a square a triangle, but if I had induced it, I could. Like no one would understand it. I couldn't make a square a triangle, but if I induced the rules, I could. My consciousness could convince me that a square is now a triangle. The symbols could then change.
Hang on.
And what would allow the categorization?
Hang on. By doing so, you would be violating the law of non-contradiction, and you are subject to logic even if you cannot conceptualize of logic, because logic is immaterial, it is metaphysical, and it applies to all things.
No, but this is the point. This is the point that Wittgenstein's getting at. There is no ability to verify contradiction in the first place unless you're able to see that you have made the contradiction, which implies an experience that goes beyond your own.
But we have already agreed that there are things integral to your being that cannot be changed, to which you could compare these things to and find contradiction. There is a method of verification.
But no, there is no method of verification. There is, what you could see, there is no method of, look at it like this. How could you falsify your own experience?
Because it contradicts a integral part of my being.
It contradicts an entire... But it couldn't have contradicted it in the first place, otherwise you couldn't have experienced it, because we've already accepted that logic...
Hang on. Are you saying you can't experience contradictory things?
No, I'm saying that you can't experience a contradiction of experience itself.
Why not?
What you couldn't experience not experiencing.
Why not? I could induce, for example, an ego death.
But that wouldn't be an experience of not experiencing. That would be an experience of not, like, you would still be experiencing, by definition.
So that would be an experience of not experiencing, which would therefore be an experience of not
what you've
experiencing.
pointed towards is, as a contradiction, what you've pointed towards is what Hegel would consider a contradiction in this idea that it's actually a poor conceptualization of the world. It's not.
But
it was never a contradiction in the first place.
Are you agreeing with Hegel there, saying it's a poor conceptualization rather than a contradiction?
Well, yeah.
Well, I would disagree. I would say that's a contradiction because it would contradict your very self. It would contradict the internality, the subjectivity. If it
contradicted your very self, which you, for example, put forward as which being consciousness in the first place, then you would not have any consciousness to experience. Like, if anything, this is worse for you. Like, for me, I can explain it. It would be the death of the self.
I can explain it. You can experience things beyond your experience.
How?
Well, for example, I just gave an example, which is ego death. You are experiencing a complete collapse of the ego. Through doing this, you are experiencing things either merging with the environment, becoming one, but is usually beyond the scope of one's experience. And in doing so, you have experienced
beyond the scope of one's current experience, but not beyond the scope of experience.
Well, it's possible to
experience can change. No one denied that, but experience, like.
Well, there's normal experience, and then there's experience that is beyond the scope.
So I could say that was a poor conceptualization of experience itself.
Well, no, it would be contradicting your prior experience, would it not? You can't just say
it would just say that. No, because then I would say that I have mischaracterized experience as being the totality of my experience, being that single event. The only thing I could say is that if...
But hang on. So you've mischaracterized it, therefore your characterization was false, right?
Well, yeah, you would be saying that your
understanding was... So let me finish. So if you've mischaracterized it as false, but it has contradicted the truth, therefore, there is a contradiction. You have violated the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah, but you've only been able to say that you've violated the law of non-contradiction if you're able to compare two experiences and say that, okay, this one was not the totality of my experience.
Well, you don't need to be able to say it because you're subject to the law.
So, yeah, we can compare quantitative experience against itself, I agree, but that allows us to come to very basic a priori truths. It doesn't allow us to come to greater conceptualizations of the world, like a table.
Yeah, like the table,
No, how?
Yeah, the table. Sorry, what was that?
So if I had one moment in which I said that is a table, and then another moment in which I said, actually, I don't think it is a table, how would I know?
You would be contradicting yourself.
But how would I know which one is the contradiction?
Because you've had a phenomenological experience that said this is a table.
And it told us it was the table, did it?
Well, we have both agreed that there is an instinctual rules that you cannot change about.
No, I agree that there was an implicit understanding of, like, implicit experience of the world. I never said that there was rules. The rules of conceptualization.
Well, there would be rules because if you change them, you would be killing yourself linguistically speaking. Your entire foundation. You can't just build a house and tear out the foundation without collapsing the house. So in doing so, this is the same with any language like English. If I start, contradicting myself in English, it's still a contradiction.
No, you misunderstand. You cannot contradict experience itself. Like, as I just said, you cannot have an experience which is not as an experience.
Yes, you can. I've just given you an instance.
No, you give me an instance in which you had a poor conceptualization of experience.
Yeah, which you conceded was false, which is violating the law of non-contradiction.
No, that's not. No, I never conceded. No. I conceded that an individual's conceptualization of experience could be false. An individual's experience of an experience cannot be false.
So is an individual subject to the law of non-contradiction? So are we talking about whether someone can create a contradiction or whether someone can understand that they've created a contradiction?
Well, yeah. I mean, like, are you talking about whether someone can actually have a contradictory experience, or are you talking can someone have an experience that contradicts their experience?
I'm talking about whether someone can have an experience that contradicts their experience.
One second. So you're saying that he could have an experience that contradicts his experience, but he couldn't do that. But he could have an experience, like for example, he could have an experience of because if we're talking about the totality of his existence, like which would be the experience of what he of the totality of everything, his experience of everything, he cannot contradict that. Okay.
Can we compare two experiences and find that they have differences that are in stark contrast to each other?
Yeah, but the problem is
therefore,
that it would always exist within this totality. Can you see? So, like, if your understanding of this totality changed, then the rules would change. You'd have nothing. Like, you cannot say that there is something objective within the subject.
We can fix this. We can fix this quite easily from looking at it from a linear point of time, and then with these rules being created, things that contradict these rules, because we can clearly point to individual experiences and see if they contradict each other. We can then go, all right, so this new experience contradicts this old experience.
The rules, though, does it? It doesn't contradict the rules.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't. The only time it would contradict a rule is if we've applied a rule to both experiences. It would not contradict the implicit rules based upon experiencing.
No.
You are applying a far more complex linguistic system.
We have a totalitarian experience, and then there's a new experience coming in that contradicts that previous. It stands in stark contrast to that previous totalitarian experience. This new experience, therefore, would be rejected as it is contradicting literally every single thing that was thought of before.
So, yeah, but okay, so we can say that you can have an experience within within experience itself, there could be a contradiction of let's say I don't know, I could say all swans are white, right? I don't know how I've come to that. All birds are white. I don't know, all of these objects, actually, let's make it like all squares are white, right? And then I see a black square and I realize, wait a minute, that can't be right. But if I was to question the notion of a square in the first place, and I was to say that this wasn't a square, this isn't white, this isn't anything like that, which allows for the broad conceptualization through time itself, how would I know whether I was right then or right now? Where would I gain objective?
You would have to compare.
What would I compare it against?
In this entity that we are talking about, the only mechanism of which he has for verification is to compare it against his previous experiences. Therefore, the square that is black would be false.
So the only thing, wait a minute, how would the square that was black be false?
Because it contradicts everything he knows about squares.
Well, no, it contradicts everything he thinks about squares, and he's thought about squares. He's induced the idea. He might be wrong about his concept of squares in the first place. Like, this is the point. Like,
he could be entirely wrong about his concept of squares in the first place.
He could be entirely wrong about everything.
Yeah, that's the same with everything we present. Like, our entire laws of physics could be just completely wrong, and we could throw it all out.
Because they correspond with reality. How do we know they correspond with reality? Because we're able to verify it between each other.
Well, are you sure about that? Because I can bust out some quantum mechanics that violate logic.
Yeah, well, Okay, verify. Well, no. I think what I would say is that would be a poor categorization again, in which I would pull into Hegel.
Oh God! But there is a truth. There is a truth value to that statement.
But that's the thing.
Right?
You're the one pointing out that there is an objective truth beyond the individual's conception of it.
Yeah, but if there is an objective truth, therefore there must be a falsehood and there must be a truthhood. Therefore, there is a contradiction between the truth and the falsity.
It's how we obtain that truth in the first place, isn't it? And how do we obtain it? We show a contradiction.
Exactly. And
how do we show a contradiction within the totality of our experience?
I'm a truth pluralist. There are multiple ways that we can derive from the proofs. Now, I would agree with you that correspondence is the superior method, right? Which is why I was arguing in favor of correspondence at the start of it. But it is not the only method of verification.
I mean, let's try and explain this way, right? So let's say if you thought all swans were white, right? And then somebody said to you, no, you are wrong. There is a black swan. Are you in contradiction?
Yeah, you two are now engaging in a Hegelian dialectic between your two ideas, which is where you would get your objective truth from.
Yeah.
So my question would be, what if you both look at the swan that is supposedly black, and one of them sees a white swan, and one of them sees a black swan?
Mm-hmm. well, then you would have to point towards. We agreed that correspondence is correspondence is stronger than coherence. Once we accept that other minds exist and that solipsism is not true. Agreed?
Yeah, but I'm saying that, sure. So we have two minds, and one of them sees this one as white, and one of them sees him as black.
And the only way that we can say that there is a correspondence theory of truth is if we agree that there is an objective world, and that my sight of the world is not the totality of my existence, and solipsism is not true. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. In which case, the verification from other people that the swan is in fact black should give me more information about the world.
But there's hang on. But one of them is definitely seeing a white swan, and one of them is seeing a black swan. How can you say?
Okay, between two individuals, there is no resolution of conflict. Like that's.
All right. So what if it's like
because
50-50 across the human population? What if it's that stupid blue and black dress?
Okay, so then we cannot conceptualize until there is ability to compromise. That's just the thesis and the antithesis need to be synthesis.
So there's no epistemological verification, right? So we have to rely on coherence.
But you've just like you've just.
So if we have to rely on coherence,
but that means there's no truth.
No, because we can still derive. Well, hang on. We both agreed at the start that there is no truth available to humanity. We can only start to approach truth.
Yeah, there is. We can only start to approach truth.
So
then there is no way to approach the truth upon the issue.
We cannot take a step towards truth.
You've just breached language. That's the point. It's like when Augustine talks of time. Like this idea of he can't speak of time.
My point is that we've rejected correspondence because it is impossible to use in this moment. So all we have left is coherence as a method of stepping towards the truth. Therefore, we use our coherence, and through a language of one, we have trumped correspondence. I've told you from the start, but I've been a truth pluralist.
You never said that from the start first. And
I have. I've said that multiple times. You can go back.
I'll go back. But
I stated I was a true pluralist multiple times.
You've said it once.
You chastised perspective philosophy for not listening.
You've said it once. And what I would say, right, like regardless, right, is this idea that correspondence is more powerful in the first place. Okay, yes, we will double back to coherence, but that will not give us truth anyway. That will give us an inductive process which we cannot verify because we have nothing to verify it against. All that we can do is verify it against our own experience, which only gives us an understanding of our own experience. Because we've already agreed that solipsism wasn't true. It would only be truth if solipsism was true.
So first off, correspondence does not give you truth. It gives you an approach to truth. We both agreed at the start of the debate that we cannot reach truth as we are finite beings and are not limitless, and we require a limitless being to have truth. So, second point, it is still a method of verification to verify
what is
truth.
It's not a method of verification. It's a method of because, like, for example, like when we're talking about empirical facts, if we've accepted that there is an actual fact of the matter in which cannot be said to be of an objective world, but we cannot breach the subjectivity of our own existence with a correspondence theory of truth with language, which is the only method. Language, would you not say that communication and language was the only method we can use to breach the totality of our experience? Or would you say that...
I would say language is. I don't think you need to communicate with other agents. You can do it in of yourself. You can communicate with yourself, the internal self. You can do introspective reflection and find within that insight around the world.
You would never be able to breach the totality of your experience. So if you were seeing...
Well, we've already found situations in which you can.
This is the point. Like, if you were already seeing a black swan and you constantly see a black swan, there'd be no way to contradict that. But like, if you accept coherence,
exactly. So and if we're in a situation where your epistemological just verification method fails because half of people see a white swan and half of people see a black swan, so we are at a point where the only we are at a point where the only method forward of verification is to compare it against previous experiences with swans. Therefore, the method of verification we have is coherence. We take a step forward towards truth in that manner.
We don't take a step forward towards truth. All we know is that there is, like what we could say that there is a swan.
How would you not say that step forward?
It's colour, because knowledge is verifiable up against the objective world. But you're telling me that there are people who are seeing, even look at it in a coherent sense. how would you decide between the individuals telling you that the swan was black and your experience of the swan being white in the first place?
Well, I
if you
would say
didn't
this. I would
accept
say,
an objective world.
well, perspective philosophy. I would argue there's three swans. There's the objective swan, there's the black swan, and there's the white swan.
Oh, now you're just being pedantic. That's
No, I'm not being pedantic. That's a clear distinction. Language games.
Okay. The point of what I'm getting at is that a movement towards truth would be the conceptualization of both parties moving towards the reality of the swan. So between the three understandings, between the three swans that exist, as we'll say, the concepts could only be... No, wait a minute. Let's finish. The concepts could only be true and be approaching truth if, and only if, they were getting closer to the reality that exists independent of the subject.
Okay, and we cannot take another step further. But
so if
the coherence
that's it.
method.
We can't take another step. It doesn't get us anything.
Yeah, but we've taken a step further. We know that the swan is not red. We know that it is not blue. We know it is not purple. We know that it is either black or white. We have taken a step.
Yeah, okay, that would be saying that, but that's correspondence.
No. It is black.
You'd be pointing towards the object and you'd be saying it's not white and it's either white or black. Now we know that it can be, it's torn between them, but it does not give us, like, for example, you would be incapable of saying that the swan is black, the swan is white.
Well, the conceptual swan certainly is.
But you're telling me that through coherence I could say that and be justified in saying it.
Well, yeah, you would be verified. You have a method of verification for the swan to go, well, I've seen swans before that are black, therefore this swan is black. And since there is no other method to move forward, you have taken a step forward towards truth.
No, because truth is reality which can be verified independent of yourself. Reality is objective.
No. Truth is a one-to-one relation with reality.
So are you accepting that solipsism is true? Can you not see your contradiction here?
Well, how did you jump from that to solipsism?
Because the only way that the swan, you could say that you were justified in saying that the swan was white, is that if the swan was white implicitly, saying that your experience was a true experience, which I agree. If your experience is a true experience, and that is the totality of truth, then the swan is white or black. But if the swan may be neither, and your experience of the swan cannot provide you that information, then you require correspondence. If you're unable to obtain
correspondence cannot tell you anything
and
more.
So if you're unable to obtain correspondence, then you're unable to become closer to the truth.
You have to use coherence because correspondence doesn't get you anywhere. So in the totality of your experience, you have to either say the swan is white or black.
No,
that
you
is
could.
A step
No. Yeah, okay.
Truth.
Yeah, you could say that the swan is white or black, but it does not give you any information about reality. You've induced it. You've assumed that the swan is white or black.
Well, hang on. It does give us information about reality because would you not say that forms, platonic forms, ideas, conceptions, etc., minds are not features of reality?
I don't believe in the world of forms, no.
Oh, boo.
I know. I'm far closer to Aristotle even there with metaphysics, but I'm
I can tell. Shit talking my boy, Plato. Read the Republic, okay? Or PP's audience, read the Republic. It's a good book.
Yeah, read the Republic and learn how not to form a state.
Learn how to run a state is what he meant.
Yeah.
Look, Plato's just a realist. Come on.
I think, for example, how would you, I feel like the only time I would agree with the idea of a world of forms is the idea of abstract language. That's as close as I would say about a world of forms.
Fair enough.
But we can wrap it up and we can do Q&A now, because otherwise we're going to kill each other. We're going to murder each other.
Exactly, feel the adrenaline running through me,
No, I think it's so but I think we've at least just to make some closing statements. Would you like to shall I make my closing statement and then you make yours?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah. So in conclusion, I would argue that morality does progress, that it's a form of knowledge in which we can obtain information in relation to desire. The ability to desire is the categorization of the phenomena of positive and negative within our experience. Now, we can gain a coherence understanding of that, but we could not categorize it inherently. We could not say that this is a desire, this isn't a desire, I want to do this, I don't want to do this, or that I should always want to do this, or I should always not want to do that, because that would mean that we would have to be able to hover over our own existence and understand our existence as an object within ourselves, and that for which we need language. And the reason we need language is the ability to verify and falsify whether phenomena truly are the way we see they are. So in the case with the swan, as the case with desire, we'd have to be able to say that, like, as a drug addict, you are wrong for wanting drugs. You are wrong for misunderstanding the pleasure-pain relationship that you will receive in relationship to the drugs that you take. Don't you see that heroin will lead to crippling addiction? And if he doesn't truly see it, I would say that there is still a truth in the matter. That truth can be understood through correspondence. However, if coherence is the only way that we can obtain knowledge, then solipsism is we are inherently purely subjective, and that truth is subjectivity, and therefore there is no such thing as truth. Truth is multiple. It is plural in the sense that it breaches any reality, any understanding of reality. There is no objective reality. There is only the self and the individual self, and the self could not actually verify what it knows about itself. It would only experience itself. And so knowledge becomes impossible. All there is left is abstract thought, unprovable and unknowable. So for morals to progress, we need to agree that there is a common world. This common world is the world in which we would understand ourselves and other people. And through understanding ourselves and other people and our similarities between ourselves and understanding the categorizations, which can then be proven through objective correspondence, then we can make inferences upon those deeper, more explicit concepts that do not relate to the language that we are born with, the language that is subconscious, the understanding. It's not even a language in the sense that it cannot be said to be something that we know of, but rather just an experience of reality that we are given. So I hope that you can all see that morals do progress, but only through objective verification or falsification with the deductive method. Thank
you. Well then, ladies and gentlemen, I will create and present my closing statement now. Hopefully you did not fall for that Hegelian nonsense. Really, morals do not progress. What we mean by the term moral progression is to say that our increasing rationalization of a static entity of morality is changing in relation. Morality and truth are static, objective features of the universe. Just as the earth revolves around the sun, we revolve around truth and morality. It is not a linear development, as was argued in the start of this, and continuing on to where we disagreed on things such as personal language, perspective philosophy has been roundly defeated, I would say, personally, subjectively, by my instinctual language argument, going on and building upon that an idea and an entity which would not be able to contradict objective features of its biology without committing linguistic suicide. Continuing on from there, I was able to argue, I would argue successfully, that the coherence theory of truth is something that can be done, just even if the correspondence theory of truth is more, let's say, rigorous in its approach and better able to take steps forward towards truth in its approach. I would still argue that the coherence theory of truth, as a truth pluralist, is a methodology of which we can approach truth. So, knowing this, I would conclude by saying thank you, Perspective Philosophy, for inviting me onto your show. It has been an absolute blast of a debate. Perhaps one day you'll get out of this, as Zizek would put it, pure ideology. All right, Q&A.
Yeah, I like how you told everyone like I was utterly defeated, like a true lawyer should.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
luckily though, truth is independent of any given individual's prescription of it. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, let's Q and A. Um, right. So if you have any questions you would like me or Magnus to answer, just at us, please. I would also like to say thank you to Magnus for this debate. It has been a great fun. I think he flip flopped all over the place, like, but I think it's great fun. Um, but no doubt he probably thought the same of me. So,
Yeah, we're going to have to engage in more Hegelian dialectics and get a
I don't know.
synthesis. The
Hopefully,
horror.
that's it. Like, hopefully, we'll be getting somewhere.
Yeah, we have definitely taken some steps towards truth in this debate.
We need another debate on veganism now
Yeah,
because
yeah, we need to argue theory of
um,
mind.
this is the thing. Like, you just presented a theory of mind for humanity, which is totally coheres with an animal's basic existence.
Oh, we'll argue that shit later.
Yeah.
So someone asked me, would I eat a swan? Yeah, I've eaten swan.
Aye, that from what first, that's breaking the law. Second, lawyers, like they think legislators think they're above all laws, and second, that's immoral.
3 points.
Lawfulness
Okay.
does not equate to justice. What is it? What is it? You speak of lawfulness, but not of justice.
Well, I won't disagree there. I'm pretty much a paid sophist, in my chosen profession.
That is actually unfortunately true, and I think that's something that you can see. You can kind of see with in relation to the move in like the Republic and like obviously the in what was it in the what's it called, the movement towards the defendants from Greek democracy to the republicanism of Rome. That was when sophistry and rhetoric became a commodity
Overpowering.
to buy,
Yeah.
and that's like the real that's the real like commodification of sophistry, like where sophistry became like where rhetoricians, it didn't matter about what was true and what you were talking about and the knowledge of like the actual
Who has the better
event.
words?
Sorry?
Who has the better words? Who can
Yeah.
trap the opponent?
Yeah, exactly. Who can create the greatest amount of influence? And then that's it, isn't it? God, I need the toilet.
Well, don't worry, perspective philosophy. I'm doing the long march throughout the institutions. I will bring actual philosophy back to law.
Well, we'll see. You guys ask us our questions and we will answer them. We are going to stay for another, I think, probably 5-10 minutes and then we'll probably wrap it up. I'm actually in dire need for the toilet, so I'm going to let Shadow talk to you guys while you ask the questions, if that's okay. Not Shadow, Magnus, sorry. And I will be right back.
All right. Ask some questions. Hopefully directed towards me, because perspective philosophy is disappearing. Yeah, I said vegan revolution. I would eat a swan. If it was black or white. Chris Grant is currently in the process of being made. It will be called Sovereign Studies. Vegan revolution. If I was in Plato's cave, sorry, just a whole bunch of questions coming. So, if I was in Plato's cave, I don't know how I would get out. I don't think I would ever get out. I think I would be stuck in the cave. Like, that's the whole purpose of the cave. To Tomato. Well, I'm starting a channel soon, so I'm finally ready to be a public figure. So, I could finally take off the mask. Chris Grant. How old am I? I'm 19. Race lever. Are you wearing a full set of Wonder Woman underoos, or is it just the bottoms? No.
Right. Hey, guys. Thank you for that short intermission where I quickly ran to the bathroom before I wet myself. Right. So, yeah, so...
Oh, Thomas Alistair. It really depends. So if you're talking animation, DC smashes Marvel. If you're talking like cinematic universe, Marvel smashes DC. If you're talking in terms of comics, DC wins yet again.
I agree. That's well said.
The killing joke is and Watchmen, and oh my god, Marvel doesn't compete.
Hush, man, I love Hush. Perspective philosophy, exploiting Magnus as a means to promote his worldview. Apparently, always.
Random guy who I know is Finn. Liberty isn't overrated. It is integral to human rights.
Just to expand upon that, I'm not. What you have to understand is I am not exploiting Magnus as a means to promoting my own worldview, but I'm giving the Magnus the opportunity to express his freedom, his subjectivity, by contrasting his worldview. Because without that, truth would be implicit to his very being, and he would never have had an option in the first place. Thomas Alistair says, what's my setup? So yeah, I'm using a Blue Yeti right now. I got this for Laura. Actually, it's a birthday present. I've been using it loads. I'm gonna have to get a link something else eventually, just because I end up using this mic all the time. But I'm using a Blue Yeti. I'm using a Logitech 920. I think it's called G920. Is it? I'll tell you. Logitech HD Pro webcam C920, and and I'm using a Neewer light. So these are Neewer LED lights, which I got a while ago as well. So I've got another one of them, and it's dimmable and it's bicolor. So there we
go. Shall I answer Thomas Alistair's question, or should you answer Phil Kessler's question?
I'm a little bit behind. Where's that? You go for Thomas. You go for Thomas first. It's fine.
Sure. So, if I could debate, I assume you meant philosopher instead of philosophy. If I could debate any philosopher from the past, I would drag Karl Marx out of his silly grave and just demolish him on dialectic materialism. Because it is just such
the
a
problem with dialectic materialism is it's just a misunderstanding of history. But
yeah.
But the point is that there must have been an understanding of history for him to be wrong against, which means there was an absolute perfect conception of history and of human knowledge, in which can be verified against, that goes beyond the subject. So, correspondence theory of truth. Anyway, so
yes, you've driven the point home. So yeah, I would bring him back. I would smash him on dialectic materialism, and I would smash him on the labour theory of value, which even in his time was roundly critiqued.
Yeah, well, the labour theory of value might be roundly critiqued, but the idea of owning the product of your labour, even in a more libertarian understanding...
I think Marx does some good stuff. I don't think...
Yeah, I was going to say...
I don't think he's the worst philosopher ever. He's just...
Not the best.
Some very bad concepts that became popular.
Oh, yeah, there's some naivety there, and it depends on what you're reading as well. Like I agree. I need to read more Marx myself, though. I don't know about you, but Capital is so long, man.
Capital takes up a fucking bookshelf.
It's like
it's slow as well. Have you ever read Edward Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire?
I haven't. No. Is it good or?
It's a fantastic piece of historic fiction. he's way too. He's wrong on the Christians. And Edward Gibbons is just his take on Julian the Apostate is just like so fanboy. It's crazy. Just like every single bit, he dedicates like 3 chapters to Julian the Apostate, and every single word is just gushing about his paganism and how fantastic he is, and how handsome and how big of a dick he had.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I'd recommend reading it. It's nice to have on your bookshelf. Like Capital's kind of like that. It's just a massive collection of books.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's one of those things where it's hard to breach. It's hard to breach more than anything. I found myself with Capital, like I've got the audiobook of like volume 1, and I thought like maybe this will be easier because I've read little bits, actually read it. I thought maybe if it's read to us, I could get into it easier. Nah, it's the same. It progresses just as slowly. It's like as if Tolkien had written a really bad piece, like a really like boring piece of history, but he's went into extreme detail. Like that's the way. It's like it's extremely detailed.
Yeah.
It goes into every single thing, but none of it's fun, none of it's entertaining. You kind of just sat there like, I'm gonna rip my eyes out. That's how I felt with Marx. Well, with Hegel, I know that he's more difficult to read in many ways, like in the way like he writes. But like the concepts that he expresses are far more like entertaining.
Well, Schopenhauer would disagree with you.
Yeah,
there.
Schopenhauer would disagree.
Clearly, you're just dulling your wits.
But Schopenhauer also was a very sad man. Okay, he what was it like? Life is. What would he say? Like kind of like life is. I'll find that quote. I'll find a nice quote about how depressed Schopenhauer is in the future. Vegan Revolution's after your question, I think there. If you want to answer that one, I'll go to Tomato.
Sure. So, can you prove there is a ghost in your machine? If not, why shouldn't others slaughter you to commodify your body? Well, it depends on what you mean by verify. I can quite easily do that through language. I can go, hang on, I have a ghost in my machine, cogito ergo sum, put some fucking mathematical equations before me and I show you how it's done. Give me a written language test and I can show you that I have language.
The better way to put that is, how can you verify someone else has a ghost in their machine?
Well, if you're asking how I can verify other minds, like, it's kind of impossible to do philosophically. It's solipsistic. We can infer it. We can infer what other minds exist.
And it's inferred from what? From certain behaviours?
Certain behaviours, yeah, like like what I was saying.
Primordial language.
Well, not primordial language, but language in of itself.
Well, it's not language.
I think being able to communicate, like it's asking like how I would personally verify whether there's a ghost in my machine. I could easily do that just through language, like as an individual.
Well, we'll agree to disagree.
Should I answer the next question?
2 minutes. So I'm just going to quickly plow through these questions that I can see now, and then I think we're going to have to call it. I think there's one for both of us there. So Tomato says, will you ever do a live stream before the UK watershed? Well, no, because you know how explicit we are in here. And also, have you ever learned how to set up your Skype and mic now? Yeah, like it's I started using like a different streaming software and stuff, which is why it took so long this time. Andrew Penny says, what about a method of verification in the world being a sensory experience, i.e. pain or pleasure, where basically pleasure is good, success and pain is bad as failure, and then an evolutionary pressure? But what we would know is that there are experiences of pain and pleasure, but we wouldn't know what experiences would give us pain and pleasure, because that would have to be built upon a broader categorization of the world, which allowed for universals and not particulars. And that's Hegel's point. And that was also to you, if you want to answer that, by the way.
So, yeah, I would no disagreement with respect to philosophy there. I don't really think I could add much.
You just disagreed with that for like 2 hours?
Yeah, I did disagree with that for 2 hours, but I don't think I need to go into much more detail. Well, I just said I don't think there's much more I can add. Like,
no, I'm not having a go. I know I'm only pulling your leg, man.
Yeah.
random guy, Finn, yeah, right, mate, says, did you know that the term ethics is derived from the Greek word ethikos, which is itself derived from the Greek word ethos, meaning custom or character? I did happen to know about ethikos.
Vegan revolution, Magnus, you are using Cartesian logic to decide I think, therefore I am. However, to then make the assumption you might not think, so therefore you aren't, is bad logic. Completely disagree. It's a positive claim to say that something has consciousness, to say that something has experiences, has subjectivity. It is skeptical to say that something does not.
No,
so
you cannot prove that your will is your own.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't. You can prove there is a will, and that's why Descartes says there is this thinking thing.
Well, hang on. It depends on what you mean by can I prove a will is my own. So we could whittle that to the semantical bone. Like, we don't have much time, but like going to that,
I'd have to
ask
hold yourself as an object unless other people tell you that it is you.
Well, I can hold myself. Well, we had 2 hours of disagreement there. Let's not have another 2 hours, shall we?
I know.
So, I'm just going to move on because I know you have to leave soon.
Yeah, I think that's everything. But again,
Tomado's got a question, and Chris Grant has a question for me.
Go for it.
So I'll quickly go through that. Would it be possible to have moral progress in an ideal world, and what would it take for us to change our world into that one? No, because morality does not progress. Our rationalization and conceptualization of morality progresses. We revolve around the sun, which is morality, just as the earth revolves around it. All right, so Magnus, what are your thoughts on veganism? I'm indifferent. Veganism is a diet, it's a ethical framework, but I do not agree with.
We're happy to debate this. Obviously, we'll be debating this again.
Yeah, I guess that's our next debate, bloody veganism.
Yeah, I think so. We're going to wrap it up there, guys. Thank you very much for watching. We both appreciate it all. I hope we do. And, it's been great fun.
Someone's got one final question for you. They asked how you would grade me if you were my lecturer.
How would I grade him? Well, I would say that he was contradicting himself. But I think the depth of thought was pretty high. The concept that he was using. So if the answer was like, does morality progress, and then he gave his understanding of it, I guess I'd probably give him a high grade, like a high 2-1. Yeah.
All right. Well, we can conclude there then.
Yeah. So, how would you grade me then? Go on.
Well, he constantly contradicts himself, so nah. So of course I'll give you very high marks. Despite disagreeing with you, clearly have a very well thought out position. Certainly a depth of thought.
A slightly lower 2-1. I said, would you give us a slightly lower 2-1 than what you got? Like you get a 68, I get a 67.
Yeah.
No, it's been good fun, man, and obviously, hopefully, we can do this again in the future, and have a debate on veganism specifically. So, thank you all for watching. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing, and as always, try to gain some perspective.
And before you go, next week, this week actually, depending on your time zone, I will be starting a channel. My first video will be on the Great Divergence. So if you would like to watch more of my content, look up Sovereign Studies over the course of the next week. Thank you very much.